Well, happy Friday, everybody. It's nice to be here a little bit early, and I know that all of my friends from the UK are saying the same thing. It's great to see you all here. I love you guys, and I want to just give a shout out to Jack. Good to see you, Simon, Jim, Peter, all of you. Thanks for getting in here and supporting the show. And hi, Arlene. Just great to have you, and great to have an audience that is promoting truth, promoting factual information, is respectful, and wants to see the best for an exciting topic, but unfortunately a topic that is full of grifters, full of people promoting false narratives, and unfortunately people doing damage to good people who are susceptible to influence. And so I'm very proud of knowing all of you, and of also being the executive director of Expanding Frontiers Research. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out the work that we are doing. And I must say that I am very, very proud of this, because we are really getting into things that are, in my opinion, some of the most important things that we can do, which is not look at a single case and say that this is the end all be all of the UFO movement. We have to look behind the scenes. We have to use records requests, FOIA, grandma, to find out what people are doing with their tax money when they're hosting paranormal conferences and bilking people in the community out of money. We have to definitely take a look at people who are promoting false narratives, such as Skinwalker Ranch and that whole debacle that's been going on for decades. It's about time for this to stop. I want to just shine a spotlight on the latest articles that we've released, the blogs. Very proud again to have done this with Jack Brewer. Utah AG withholds Reyes Fugel responsive records. So as you know, because I've been talking about this, and we also mention this and do research on our blog, the Utah Attorney General, Sean Reyes, has been embroiled in controversy for quite some time. If you do a little digging, you can see his association with Tim Ballard, who was the genius behind Sounds of Freedom, which is a show allegedly about their exploits with tackling child sex trafficking. It has come to light that this has all been a con job, that they've actually put people in more danger because of their escapades. And there are also allegations of sexual assault towards Tim Ballard. And the Attorney General, from a lawsuit that was filed, has also been involved in bullying and intimidating witnesses that are coming forward. So this is a huge story in Utah for all of us. But the connection to the story is Mr. Brandon Fugel, the owner, the steward, Mr. Open Kimono, which is, whatever. It's a little creepy on that one. But he is the man who has promoted this ranch, who has said that he would be forthright with scientific research, transparent. We've never seen that happen. You have to go to a paywall to see the behind the scenes, which is basically just a bunch of guys sitting around talking about not a lot, no transparency. And it is interesting with the other things he's been involved with. And I'm just going to say a couple more things. We've mentioned on our blog, we've talked about SafeMoon, which was a crypto company that was involved in some scandal. They built millions of dollars out of unsuspecting people. Brandon Fugel was a very big promoter of SafeMoon, and I'm not quite sure how he's escaped the lawsuits, because other people who have been promoting SafeMoon are now involved in that lawsuit. And Brandon Fugel was also involved with Joe Firmage, who is a Utah native and was looking into this free energy, again, bilking people out of millions of dollars. So here we've got, 3 different instances where things are taking place and it isn't a good thing. So I want to just say that, as we continue to do our stories, then you'll be able to find out more. But this is really important, and it goes to the backstory of what people are truly involved with at the end of the day. So go to Expanding Frontiers Research to not only contribute to our work, but to also check out the wonderful blogs. So without further ado, I'm going to add Philip Mantle to the stage.
Yeah, good
Hello,
evening,
Philip.
Erica. Good evening, and nice to speak to you again.
Good to speak to you. How are you?
Yeah, I can't complain. I'm as busy as ever. Long may that last. A bit cold at the moment because we're in the winter here, but it's been under, below zero for a couple of weeks, but it's warmed up a bit, so it's a bit better. But I'm busy. Thank you very much.
Well, good. You're always busy, and it's always such a pleasure to see your face and talk to you. And I'm really excited because I think we're going to have a very productive conversation today. We were talking a bit before we hit the live button on the broadcast, and we were talking about some things that are going on here in America. And as we all know, American ufology has long been fraught with just a clown show. And so I think a little bit later on, we're going to get into that because, this is an important topic for all of us because we actually enjoy the subject. Some of us think that there might be more to this that is worthy of study. And because of the theatrics that are going on here in the United States, it oftentimes pushes us away from really doing good work about something that could be one of the most life-changing and profound things that we discover. So
Absolutely. We'll talk about anything you like, Erica. No problem.
oh, good. Well, this will be fun then. I wanted just first of all, like, you have been around for a long time. How many decades have you been in this subject?
I started in 1980. Literally, I was 21 years of age, and I joined a local UFO group. I live in the north of England, not far from the city of Leeds in West Yorkshire. And just by chance, I saw in the local newspaper the formation of the Yorkshire UFO Society. And I travelled on the bus that Sunday. I didn't drive at that point. And it was formed by two brothers, Graham and Mark Birdsall. Graham went on, of course, to publish and edit the highly successful newsstand magazine, UFO magazine. Sadly died, unexpectedly a few years back. So yeah, I remember going to my first meeting there, and never in 1,000 years would I have believed that I'd still be involved, 40 plus years later, or involved to the level that I have been on and off down the decades. So yeah, it's been a long time, and you can tell by the grey hair and the bald spot,
Well, you wear it well.
Well, I'm writing a new book at this moment, and I've been looking back on some of the old things that we've done, and I was going through old photographs. And the one thing I miss instantly is my hair. I used to have tons of it, Erica. I have masses of it, all curly as well.
You did. I was looking at some old pictures of you the other day. You had it going on.
Yeah, but those were the days. But yeah, happy times.
How fun, though. I mean, that must have been such an interesting experience for you to get involved in the 80s. And I mean, just to be over in the UK, I'm just jealous. And I really want to get over there. I keep promising everybody I'm coming over. I'm going to visit you guys, and I'm going to make it happen this year, I'm hoping. But talk a little bit about some of the stories that were floating around then and some of the people that you met.
Oh, it's where to start. I mean, Graham was a big character. He was a big man, physically. And his younger brother, Mark, was the quieter one of the two. So we were quite happy with that because we'd let Graham do all the upfront stuff and he would keep him away from us, and then we were happy doing that. We were fortunate, Erica, that again, in the early 1980s, areas in around the Yorkshire Dales, it's a national park in North Yorkshire, areas in and around the town of Skipton had a lot of sightings. And that went on through the mid-80s as well. And somehow a lot of these sightings found their way to us. We made ourselves as visible as possible. We do local, talks and local media and all that kind of stuff. And of course, and I know you know about what I'm about to say, at the same time, over in Norway, in Hessdalen, in central Norway, they had the very same type of thing. although it was much more localized. It was there in the Hessdalen Valley, down below the mountaintops. And UFO Norway and UFO Sweden set up Project Hessdalen. Heineck went there and rightly called it a UFO laboratory. So we tried, I was in touch with the people involved there. One of them was a gentleman called Odd Gunnar Road. And he and I have been friends ever since. And I've been to Norway and Sweden. And he's been here many times.
Oh, wonderful.
So we tried to replicate Project Hessdalen, but we just couldn't get the assistance. We went to the local university in Leeds to see if they could help us, but they couldn't. This was in an era of Mrs. Thatcher, of course, with turmoil and strikes and wars. So, but it was very similar to what happened in Norway, and so we were kept busy constantly. Erica, we were always had something to work on. There was always something new happening, and so it was never a dull. And lots of personalities as well, of course. A gentleman you may not know, but he was called Hilary Evans. He was a big influence on me. Was Hilary, again, sadly no longer with us. Jenny Randalls. Jenny's still around today, but not as involved as she used to be. The good thing about those days, Erica, there was lots of local UFO groups like ours dotted around the country. They all produced their own little newsletters, which we did. We used to have a little machine called a Gestetner, and you used to crank it, and you would print your little newsletter off.
Wow!
I mean, this is a true story. Mark Birdsall, Graham's brother, lived on the 7th floor of a block of flats. And we bought a printing machine. This printing machine was about the size of a washing machine. And we had it delivered, and we thought, I hope the lift is working in the flats, because there is no way we can carry this thing up 7 floors. Anyway, it was working. We didn't know how to use this thing. We brought a guy in who showed Mark how to use it. And then we printed our own little magazine called Quest. And that was in Mark's bedroom. He had 2 bedrooms in his flat. We used it as an office. One night we'd been working on the magazine, and there was a knock on the door, and Mark opened it, and there was a very big fella from the apartment underneath. And he was not best pleased. He was not pleased because the noise of the printing machine was going through the ceiling. So
I bet he wondered what you guys were actually doing.
Well, he did. We told him we were printing the local parish magazine for the church, and that calmed him down. So what we had to do then was to lift this thing up and put padding underneath and all that kind of stuff, But it was just one of the funny things that happened, And of course, eventually, that from starting at that, humble way with a little Gestetner, it was called the UFOS Journal. That ended up eventually becoming UFO magazine, professionally produced and edited and on the newsstands and selling around the world all those years later. Right. So it had very humble origins. I'd left before they published UFO magazine, but it did have very humble origins indeed. And a lot of people don't realize that. And what turned out to be Graham Birdsall's last conference in Leeds, he organized it. I spoke at it, and he didn't always do it. This was 21 years of him organizing conferences. And he introduced me, and I said, don't leave. Just stay the way you are, Graham. I've got something I want to show you. And I showed some people of how it all started, way back in the 1980s. I got old photographs.
Oh, cool.
And things like that. And Graham's wife was sat on the front row, Graham's wife, Christine, and she was crying because she was married to Graham, all those years back. So again, the conferences started with 30 or 40 people. By the time Graham had finished, it was like, 800 or 1,000 people in the audience. So a lot of work and a lot of things happened in between, but they were very happy times, Erica. We had a lot of fun.
See, that's so wonderful. And I look at, what the UFO subject has devolved into now, especially here, and it's not fun. It's, we've got a lot of people that have been bullied and abused on social media, and people who have been doxxed and all sorts of things at the hands of a particular group of people. And that it is really sad that those things have to happen, because it should be fun. We should all be, just having a good time together, looking at information, and going out and doing field studies and all of these things that should be giving us joy. And that doesn't happen, I think, now, at least over here. So.
No, there were happy times. Things did go wrong from time to time. We're only human, after all. But we did have a lot of fun. And Graham had a great sense of humor. And if you made a mistake, if you made a fool of yourself, he would remind you. But it's same as if Graham did something wrong and we'd make fun of him. So it wasn't just one-way traffic. So we had a lot of good times, but at the same time, we hoped we were learning something about the phenomena. Where these locations were in the Yorkshire Dales were in a relatively small area, but different topography compared to Hessdalen. There were a lot of rolling hills, and we literally tried to confront the phenomena, head on. For example, we camped out on the moors in a caravan for a whole week, and we encouraged local people to drive up onto the moor and recount what they'd seen, and they did. People came from all around, and what we discovered by that, of course, Erica, was that the phenomena wasn't something new. People had lived there, father and son, and we got reports going way back when. So, whatever the phenomenon was or is, it wasn't something new. It was there in the landscape, ad infinitum, really. And we also found that there was links to the paranormal. I'll give you an example. In a little village near there, we received a letter from a gentleman. We phoned him up and said, "We'll come and speak to you." So we drive to this village, and the village in reality was like 6 houses. And we had the letter, and it had his number on, but none of the houses had any numbers on. So we just knocked on the first door, and we said, "We're looking for this gentleman." And this lady said, "Have you come about the ghost dog?" And of course we hadn't, but she told us the story of these 2 glowing red orbs that floated down through the village from time to time, and they were the eyes of the ghost dog, of course. But in reality, what they were seeing was these red lights, And we had other paranormal encounters reported to us as well in these little areas. And at the time, it was just coincidental, we thought, but perhaps not when you look back in hindsight. But nonetheless, we documented whatever we came across. And it was just a learning exercise all the time. Whenever you thought you knew something, the phenomena would show that you didn't really know anything. It would wipe the slate clean and start again, and we did. I've done that many, many times down the years.
And I think I love getting out in the community, and I love hearing people's stories. And I think that's really important to document all of that, whether they're, accurate or whether they're, because there was one report and never everybody else needs to come up with reports. I mean, whether it can be verified that this was something truly abnormal or whatever, it's just really cool to document that and to talk to people about all of this. I love it.
Yeah, I mean, we all did that. I did it on my own. I would go to some quite isolated places. It would be just one house on its own somewhere, and interview the residents. They'd somehow found us and reported it to us. And I spent many days wandering around these hillsides, with my wife, or with Mark or Graham or all of us. We used to take groups of us out there, and it was just a big learning exercise and a lot of fun. And we got to know the main place we used to go is a place called Carlton Moor, and it's just above the village of Carlton. And when you drive through the village, it's just a small little place with a local pub and a couple of shops. And you drive through the village, and as you go through the village, then the moors start, and you go up the hill. And once you get up there, there is no more buildings. It's, you know, and we got to know the locals in the pub. They knew what we were up to, and they were quite willing to have our flyers put on their notice board. We knew the lady in the local shop, because when we spent a week on the moor, we'd go to the local shop and buy everything that was in it almost. You know, she thought, this is great. We even got to know a local farmer, because he would leave the eggs, fresh eggs, at the end of the driveway, and you would just go and help yourself and pay some money. You'd leave your money for it.
Wow.
So we'd get some eggs and leave the money. And we talked to them because it was the locals we wanted to commune with, because they were the people reporting these things. And we got a lot of good information as a result. And very few of them laughed at us either. They said, oh, yeah, they all knew somebody who'd seen something at some point. And it was just, a lot of fun times, a lot of happy days.
That's so wonderful. I mean, and I love, like I said, for me, that was a really important thing. That is a really important thing, to get out and talk with people and hear their experiences, or, even at my business, I love to talk to people when they come in about, some of the things that they've experienced in their lives. And that's a great joy. And it really helps you connect with other people. So,
well, I also felt it was a privilege, because when I wanted to get more involved in the subject, I thought, if I can't witness the phenomenon myself, the next best thing is to speak to those that have. We know most sightings have a rational explanation. We understand that, but nonetheless, there was lessons to be learned from that. And but I thought it was a great privilege that I'm allowed into this person's home to discuss these things with them, and I remain like that today. I think it's a great privilege when I speak to individuals who've had an experience that they feel they're able to relate that to me.
And have you ever? I mean, obviously in your career, you've had times where you've interviewed people and what they've seen is actually something that is explainable. How do you go about dealing with that when that issue arises?
Yeah, well, you just got to be honest, Erica. I mean, I'll give you one example. A gentleman, I wouldn't say elderly, but a gentleman in his 60s contacted me, and he didn't live that far from where I was living at the time. And he said he'd seen this big thing out the back of his house. And I said, look, I'm really busy at the moment. I took down his name and address, and I sent him a report form to fill in. I was working, I couldn't do much, so I sent it, and he sent it back. And he drew this amazing flying saucer, with a dome top and lights all around it. And so I rung him up and I thanked him for it. And he said, I've seen it again, Philip. So I said, okay, if you see it again, I don't care what time it is, what day it is, you phone me. Lo and behold, a few days later, the phone goes at, 1 o'clock in the morning. There he is. So I said, right. I knew approximately where he lived. I said, leave your light on. And I jumped in my car and went down there, and I got an inkling what this was. And he was a very nice guy, well educated. He was a property developer. And he says it's still there. So we walked through his house into his back garden, and there it was. And it was the planet Venus. And I already suspected that before I got there. So I told him, I said, well, you are looking at something that's extraterrestrial. It's the planet Venus. And it was beautiful. And I used to know that because where I used to live, when I got up on a morning, I used to start really early. As soon as I came out of the back door, I could see the planet Venus right behind us, almost framed between the buildings. It was a beautiful sight. But this gentleman had drawn, if you had not gone there and just relied on his report form, we have this beautiful flying saucer drawn, which of course looks nothing like the planet Venus.
Right.
So I walked back through his living room, and on his coffee table was a book, and it was a UFO book. And it was the first one he'd read. So he's reading this UFO book, probably the first time in his life. he's walked outside at night, looked into the night sky, and lo and behold, there's this bright light, and I just had to tell him, and he was okay with that, and I thanked him for his time and left.
Good for you.
Yeah, well, I just had to do it, and so, but others are not so pleased. I mean, what we get nowadays, of course, Erica, is cell phone footage. People say, I filmed this, and I say, okay, let's have a look at it, and it's just a dark sky with a light in it. It could be anything, and you just got to be
Jeremy Corbell's videos.
Well, you just got to be polite and be honest and say, look, I have no idea what it is. It's just a light in the distance. It could be a drone. It's more likely an airplane, whatever. But it's of no use to anybody.
Right.
It bears no resemblance to what you're telling me you saw. And I'm sorry, but that's the way it is.
And I mean, it is interesting because, I think I've had, over the years, there have been people that I've talked to that have had specific researchers, investigators, come to them and like identify mundane objects and say, well, this is what it is. And the investigator makes them feel so stupid. And it doesn't sound that's, you didn't do that. And I think that it's really important for people to empower other people. It's like, that is really great that you looked up in the sky. That is really cool that you contacted somebody. And now let me tell you what this gorgeous thing is. Yeah. And then that opens your whole world up to learning more about what's going on, up in the sky around us.
But then you have the other side of the coin, Erica. Again, where I lived with my wife at the time was a fairly quiet little road, and we had a local gentleman. I just use his name, Mick. Mick he was actually a pig farmer. He ran his own pig farm, and he made the newspaper headlines because he went to the bookies and put a substantial amount of money on the fact that UFOs would be announced as being real, aliens from space. And he used to just turn up at my house out of the blue, and you'd be a knock on the door and he would be there. And it was the kind of guy that when he spoke to you, he would stand right in front of you.
That's always special. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And he told me he was seeing these things. And of course he'd go to the bookies and put some more money on. And I was pretty sure that what he was looking at, Erica, where he was describing them, were satellites. Because you can go out any night of the year, so long as you've got a nice clear sky and it's dark enough, and you can see them. They're like little stars that move across the sky. But Mick never threatened us, never did anything wrong, but you just didn't feel comfortable with him. My wife certainly didn't. She used to say, don't let him in. Right. Do not let him in. So I didn't tell him what he was looking at was probably satellites, because I'm not sure I'm not sure he would have believed me in the first place, and I'm not sure how he would react. So that was the opposite side of the coin. And of course, in 1983, here in the UK is when the Rendlesham Forest case actually broke in the media. And we had a Sunday newspaper called The News of the World, and it was on the front page, big headlines. UFO lands in Suffolk, and that's official. So Mick, come Monday, took that newspaper into his bookies and said, you need to pay me out. And they said, no, it has to be somebody like the United Nations or the president or the prime minister, not the News of the World newspaper. The newspaper is going to be wrapping your fish and chips up tomorrow. And But that was me. And he was harmless, but he was just a bit, how can I say, unusual. So, when you have to tell people these things, it just depends on the individuals in question.
You're right. And I think
it's what it is.
And I think that you do find people that are, they want to believe so much that they could actually potentially be a safety issue for the investigator. And I think that's, that's a great point that you have to be aware of.
Yeah, similar when it comes to the genuine article, when people have had an encounter or some kind of experience. I often used to ask them, what do you think's happened to you? What was the nature and origin of your experience? And irrespective of what they said, so long as they were happy with that, Erica, who was I to try and tell them any different? Because at the end of the day, I don't really know. And so if it was something they were content to believe in and rationalize, they rationalized it in a certain way. I'll give you an example. When I co-authored my first book in 1994 with my pal Carl Negatis, it was called Without Consent. It was all about abductions and missing time in the UK. And I literally drove from one end of the UK to the other, Wales and Scotland, interviewing people face to face. The only place I didn't go was Ireland, and that's because I didn't have anyone to interview there. Otherwise, I would have gone. And towards the end of the book, I asked a number of the abductees, experiencers, whatever you would like to call them, what they believe was the nature and origin of their experience. Some said definitely thought it was ET. Others thought it was some kind of spiritual experience. Others said, I just don't know. You know, one young man I interviewed in Wales, he said, I thought it must be the Russians. Now, he didn't really believe that. It's just that was his way of rationalizing it. This was a very negative experience for him. And in the 1980s, when this happened, the bad guys were the Russians. Mm-hmm. Therefore, it must have been the Russians that done this, you know. But so long as that he was happy to believe that, I'm not going to tell him any different. So that's a different approach you have to take. But also, I went to interview two ladies, two friends. They lived down near Birmingham. And when they told me their story, they'd been out for the evening. I think they'd been playing bingo, you know, and they were driving home and they saw this thing. And they claimed to have a missing time period and what have you. When I noted it all down, I couldn't see where there was any missing time at all. I just couldn't find it. And of course, they'd spoke to some other, again, alleged investigator who had his own agenda. It was him that had put this idea that was missing time in their head. But now it was in their head and there was no removing it, Erica. Right. So I just left it alone as it was, you know. So you have that to face with as well. I'm not saying I'm any better than anyone else. I'm just saying these things happen.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that's, I really appreciate you telling these stories. I think they're important. There's so much to think about when you're dealing with this. And unfortunately, it can't, you just, especially now, I think it's gotten almost worse that we've got this belief system that we're willing to, light the pitchforks for and, storm the Capitol and take on the Pentagon and things. So we've kind of reached a point where things have gotten a little bit more dangerous with regard to that. And I think, unfortunately, that's bled over into the UFO kind of conspiracy theory type of situation, which is
absolutely. I mean, if you go on Twitter, you don't see much discussion of the latest sighting or case or experience, whatever you want to call them. It's all about Dave Crush, the DOD, and these documents and that document, and you're thinking, what's happened to studying the phenomena? Where's that all gone? And in amongst all this as well, when people, I'm sure Mr. Grush is honest in what he's saying. I've no reason to disbelieve that. But when you look at what all of them are saying, the disclosure lobby, if you want to call them that, there is no mention of the close encounter experiences, the abductions. It's all right for Mr. Grush to say that, people have been murdered to keep these secrets, and we have crash retrievals, but there is no mention anywhere of the abduction phenomena. I find that quite bizarre. Whether you like it or not, it is part of the UFO phenomena. It is part and parcel of it. I mentioned Hillary Evans, as one of my influences. Hillary, I remember him saying that the UFO phenomena and abduction phenomena were not connected. They were two totally separate things. And he was adamant you should leave the close encounters to people who were experienced in psychiatry and psychology. That was his He's understood, but whether you like it or not, they are part and parcel of it. But that seems to have been penciled out now. And I think even Leslie Keane admitted that an article she'd written for whichever publication, newspaper or magazine, she had, on purpose missed things out to try and give the subject more credibility. But yeah, more credibility.
Well, good luck with that. She's not doing that too well.
Well, I thought but this goes back again. We go back in time, Erica. With Kenneth Arnold, it was flying saucers. When the United States Air Force started to investigate the subject, they changed that to UFOs. They changed the heading to try and give it a bit more credibility. Now they've changed UFO to UAP, which annoys the living daylights out of me. It really, I got to be honest, it really does. But again, to try and give it an air of credibility, which is what they did back in the 1950s. So what is any difference? The answer is there's no difference. It's just another name, and it won't make any difference. But, to omit on purpose certain things, I believe is a big mistake. Even if you are uncomfortable with those certain things, you cannot deny it. It's like doing a criminal investigation and saying, I don't like that evidence, we better leave that.
Right. Well, I think that's a problem with the UFO field in general. They cherry pick data because they want to fit the narrative that the UFOs are ETs or angels or demons or whatever we're having. And today, whatever the greatest cult leader has told us that we need to believe, and we omit information that is really critical to not only to understanding the history, to understanding an investigator, to understanding their mindset. And I think those things are really very, very important. And my fear, as an archivist, is that, when specific holdings go to places that people need to really understand the motivations behind that particular archivist, are you already believing in UFOs? Are you stating that UFOs are real, and as a result, you're going to cherry pick your data to promote UFOs and ET? Or are you going to give all of the information out, the good, the bad, the ugly? We know that there have been, lots of talks behind the scenes about J. Allen Hynek and some of his shenanigans and things. And there has been a small group of people that have pushed very hard to keep that out of the public eye for fear that it would tarnish the UFO topic, which in my opinion, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I think that doesn't speak very highly of the people who are trying to do that. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's certain things happen that we might be uncomfortable with, but we can't ignore it. It's just wrong. And I'll give you another example. I won't mention his name, but there was an abduction researcher who was, quite vocal in the 1980s. He made it quite clear that if you didn't report the little grey guys, then your report was not genuine. Well, I said to him then that you have to rule out Betty and Barney Hill to start off with, because they didn't necessarily report the archetypal little grey guys. They were, slightly different. And a lot of others as well. I mean, here in the UK, when I've been investigating things, we have the most weird and wonderful things reported, which kind of reflects our society. We are multicultural, so you would have, if you took his hypotheses, you would have to wipe most of those out, which is just, again, he's not, because what he's doing, as you just said, he's cherry picking the information to suit his own theory, his own beliefs, really. You might call it a theory, it's a belief system. We all have a belief system one way or another, some greater than others. And we can't help it. That's part of being human. But a lot of us are aware of it, and we try to act, accordingly, objective as can be possible. And that's why you get a lot of nonsense that seeps through, because people don't have that objectivity. They just believe it, and it's unfortunate, but that's the way it is.
And you bring up a really good point about abduction research, and that kind of being left in the hands of somebody who's a qualified mental health, psychologist, therapist, sometimes, and I fully agree with that statement. I remember I was, for a hot second, I was on the under Kathleen Martin, the abduction ERT team from MUFON, and I quickly just stepped back because I said, this is not, I can't handle this. I don't feel that I have the qualifications, and this is a disservice to people that are reporting things. And I'm also was watching other people say, great, well, you've had this experience. Yes, you've seen ET and you're chosen, and so I was watching other investigators do this, which was really harmful and ludicrous.
Well, I did a similar thing. I didn't step back completely. I wasn't a part of I was part of the British UFO Research Association, but I was in contact with a lady who lived near to where I did, and she had a series of things happen to her, which was fine. She was an adult, and in fact, she first went to speak to her family about it, and they shrugged their shoulders. She went to her local doctor. I think he gave her some pills, and she was none too happy about that because they didn't help. So finally, she ended up with me, and she was happy because I sat there and listened to her. I didn't ask so many silly questions. I was just there and sat there, and she was glad that I just sat there and listened to what she was saying. And so a number of things happened to this lady, and I documented them as best I could. And we became almost like friends. But then she started to say she had a young daughter of about, 8 or 9, that she had seen something as well. And a daughter had drawn this little picture. That was time for me to walk away, from that particular incident. Not completely, but, I'm thinking, I'm all right speaking to adults. They're responsible for what they're saying, for what their actions are. This is a young kid, and I'm not qualified to be talking to children about this type of thing, whatever this thing may be. So I politely, I didn't make it obvious that was what we're doing, but I stepped to one side on that particular event because it was out of my realm. It really was. It was above my paychecks, so to speak. Not that there was any paycheck involved.
Exactly.
But and sadly, I linked up with this lady. We actually went to see a psychiatrist in Manchester. And he I left them there, and he checked her out and said she's fine, Philip. Again, I'm not going to mention his name, but what this particular psychiatrist wanted to do, he was coming up to retirement, and he wanted to retire and get involved full time in this area of research. And sadly, no sooner had he retired, but he passed away. So he might have been the sort of UK equivalent of Dr. John Mack, although he wasn't a Harvard professor. He was a doctor, but a similar status almost. And it was a great shame, and because he wasn't a believer in aliens, he wasn't a disbeliever. He was open-minded and objective, and it was a great shame. But it almost came off. But nonetheless, he told me about this lady. He'd interviewed her, he'd done whatever tests, and she was fine. She had no psychiatric or psychological problems. She was, and he didn't say what he thought her experiences were. He just said, she's not nuts. In other words, I'll be plain and blunt about it. But when her daughter, she started talking about her daughter. That was me finished.
Good for you. I think that's great. I think more people in this subject should realize their boundaries, which they clearly don't, and just kind of step off when things are out of their realm of education. And I just want to ask you, because like Emma Woods comes up, we have a great deal. She's been generous to donate a lot to our archive. And obviously her story with Dr. David Jacobs is very concerning, and should be cause for alarm for many, many people with what happened. But I mean, do you feel that there is an element to this where people can really be abused sexually or mentally, both taken advantage of?
I don't know if I would use the word abused as such, although I understand what you're talking about. But That's why wherever I could, I always made sure I was accompanied by somebody else. That was usually my wife, because my wife was interested in the topic, not to the same level as me, but she was interested, or a colleague. But sometimes you couldn't avoid that. You went on your own. It was just the way things worked out. But I was also in the trade union movement here in the UK. I was a shop steward at the factory where I worked. And we used to use a similar practice there. If you went to speak to the director or them, you would take someone with you. And then it wasn't your word against them. And I did the same. I tried to do the same in the UFO side of things, but it wasn't always possible. But, when there's one-on-one with anybody in any situation, there's always that, chance that something will go wrong. That a person does something wrong or harmful, be it intentional or not, because like the two ladies I told you I interviewed, and they talked about their missing time, they went under hypnosis and had this abduction experience. But I personally couldn't see any missing time on their journey at home. It was the UFO investigator who put that idea in their head. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, a dangerous thing to do. Whether you would call that abuse or not, I leave to you. But again, when we turn up at someone's house or their place of work, or we meet them in a cafe, we're going there as a UFO investigator. So you're already planting that in their mind. You can't avoid that. You're not just some random person they've met. So that is already in their head, Erica, and you have to be aware of that. And things go wrong. People abuse their position, for want of a better word, and we have to be wary of that, and also take our precautions for ourselves as well, because it works both ways, know. And but yeah, it's one of those things.
Okay, thank you. I think these are important topics. It was funny last night. For some reason, I was, just goofing around on YouTube, and I came across the Stan Romanek case. And I tried to get through a majority of that documentary. And obviously, we've heard about Stan Romanek for many, many years. That is a case unlike many others. And now that I have a little bit more foresight, just to look, or hindsight, I can look back and say that this man was so mentally ill. I mean, there were so many red flags in this that it is just amazing that any researcher in their right mind got behind this individual. And we know that, obviously how that worked out. But what did you think when Stan Romanek first appeared on the scene?
Well, my position is, rightly or wrongly, and people will happily disagree with me, we have no proof that aliens have visited Earth anyway. We have no direct proof. I'm not counting it out completely, but we don't. So if somebody comes to you and said this has happened to me, you don't automatically say, "Oh, you've been abducted by aliens." Right. You've had an unusual experience. Let's detail it. Let's document it. But unfortunately, it goes the other way. I won't mention which it was, but I went to a very large conference in the United States some years back, and I'm sat in the audience just like anybody else, and I could not believe what I'm hearing. And because I'd been a conference organizer here in the UK, and I've had a variety of people speak with a variety of different opinions and views and work, including, and we don't go into these details, including the alien autopsy hoax.
Oh yeah, that's a fun one.
Yeah. But I'm looking at these people on the stage and I'm thinking, why has anybody let them up there? Because I've really, and then I'm speaking to them afterwards, on a social side of things, and I'm thinking, it just amazed me. It disappointed me in some respects, and I was part of MUFON for a while. Like you said, you were part of their research team. And I think it was only a couple of years back, it might have been either before COVID or just after, they had the Secret Space Program conference.
Yes. Oh, that was...
And I'm thinking, what? What? Really? I didn't say anything because he's not, and I just shook my head, Erica. I really did, But there you have, like with Stan, he that's why with this lady I was talking about, I had the opportunity to go and speak to the psychiatrist. I asked her if she'd like to go along, and yeah, she was happy to do that. Wasn't that far away. It was only in Manchester, under an hour's drive. And I told her what the psychiatrist said. And she said, well, I knew that anyway. I don't know what's happened to me, but I know I'm not, I'm not off my head. And, but yeah. But see, that's the subject we're in, Erica. There are people who have a very dominant belief system, and they will use anything and anyone to affirm their belief system. And that, and they don't necessarily do out of malice, they just do it. And I mean, the biggest guy of the lot, in my opinion, is Jaime Maussan in Mexico. Mm-hmm. I mean, as soon as his name's attached to something, you should not look at it. You should just walk away, because he is, hoax after hoax after hoax after hoax after hoax. And I mean, going on for years, but yet he still gets invited to UFO conferences. He still gets invited to talk at places. People reference him, and you're thinking, oh my God, do you never learn? You never learn. I
mean, it was the same thing. Like just watching the oh my gosh, Stan Romanek stuff. I'm like, this guy went on for quite some time. He was, he had everybody convinced. And I mean, I remember seeing, in the documentary, there were, I think Leo Sprinkle was in the documentary, Alejandro Rojas. I mean, just people like that I am sure, I mean, it would be interesting to ask Alejandro what he thinks about supporting that now. But you could just see these pictures of Stan Romanek, and he had obviously either, beaten him. I mean, what he did to him, the marks on his body. I mean, to me, they clearly look like cigarette burns that went all the way down, which in and of itself, you've got that problem. There's a problem. And it was just absolutely unbelievable. And
well, it happens in real life as well, Erica. We've just had a quite a high profile criminal case on the television here of a young woman who claimed that for years she'd been sexually abused by a gang of local men, and that they'd beaten her. So she'd ring the police and they'd turn up, and she would have bruises all over and cuts. And this went on for several years. But in the end, she was doing it to herself. There was no abuse. There was no grooming gang. It was her, and she'd manipulated all this evidence, but they found out in the end. And she literally, you saw one of the, the police body cam videos when they turned up from the emergency call. They opened the door and there's blood rolling out of a cut over her eye and all this. And you're thinking, poor girl. No, not poor girl. She'd done it herself. Wow. So in ufology, we have the same type of thing. Why they do that? This young lady, there is no idea why she did this. She was an attractive young lady. I think she was, in a job. There's no reason for it that is obvious anyway. That may come out later. But same with Stan Romanek. You look at it, oh God Almighty, but we don't learn, Erica. Some of us do. Right. When I say we, I mean us collectively, and on it goes, and it's just a shame of that. There's not a lot we can do about it at times. We can just keep raising it like you have done this evening.
Right. And I think, it's interesting because over the years, I've spoken with a lot of the big daddies in the UFO world. And I've just said to them, hey, there's some problems in this culture, in this community. And what are we going to do to make it better? And every single one of those people said, well, we can't do anything. This is the way it's always been. And this is the way it's always going to be. And I thought, that's really lazy and pretty pathetic. Don't we want this subject to be better? Don't we want it to be a safer space for people, don't we
Well,
want?
you have to remind them about things that have happened, as you're doing this evening. I mean, it was the same with Bill Moore and Richard Doty. They drove Paul Benowitz to suicide. They literally did. Bill Moore did a mea culpa at the MUFON symposium, and made his exit and disappeared. I had Bill over here at one of our conferences. He stayed with me, but you still see Richard Doty doing the rounds now. And I'm thinking, why are people bothering with this man? Him and Bill Moore drove a man to suicide. And it's a fact, they did. And I've kept in touch with Bill on occasion down the years. He lives out in the desert somewhere on his own. But it is a fact. It really is. It is a fact.
And just think of how much more of that goes on than what we really know about. I mean,
well, no, you're right. And it's a colleague of mine often reminds me as well about hoaxes. How many of those are perpetuated that we don't uncover, that we're not aware of, and that are deeply rooted into the UFO subject? Probably more than we would care to admit, if we're honest, Erica. But they are part and parcel of the problem. I like my involvement with the alien autopsy film. I was determined to get to the bottom of it. It just took me a lot longer than I thought it would do. But I held my hands up and said, I made mistakes with it. I was honest, but you have to learn from them mistakes. And I couldn't believe that, and I'm not going to blame anybody apart from Jaime Maussan, but when the Roswell slides fiasco came up, it was almost like a carbon copy of the alien autopsy film. And I thought, why did I spend 14 years working on that thing only for silly buggers to go and do exactly the same again? Did they not learn?
Right.
And I shook my head. But of course, Maussan's been out with these plastic mummies from Peru or wherever.
Well, the latest was those were good. Oh my Lord.
Yeah,
that's just, and they weren't even good. I mean, this was like, geez, I could go get a Jello mold and make up something today. In fact, I mean,
they were like a decimated Barbie doll, weren't they?
Seriously, people would buy it. Like, I honestly have thought, like, for a split second, okay, I would love to, like, just go to a conference, like, write up a bunch of fake documents and just put them on a chair and just see where people ran with it, or like tonight's the night. Maybe I'll get the.
Well, that's exactly what happened. That's what happened with the MJ12 documents. They were fake, and they were fed into the UFO community in the hope that the government would release real ones. And I'll show you how the conspiracies work and how quickly they can work. Graham Birdsall and I were en route to the conference in Laughlin, Nevada. We flew from England to New York, and we changed planes in New York. As we're in New York, it's the time that the space shuttle burnt up on re-entry. We're watching it in the airport. So we flew from there to Las Vegas, and then we drove from Las Vegas down to Laughlin. And I said to Graham, you just watch what people are saying about the shuttle disaster. And we were queuing up at the hotel to book in, and you could hear people in front of us coming. And this had been within hours of it happening. And all these crazy stories about it being a conspiracy and all that. And Graham was not best pleased. These people had lost their lives. They had families,
right.
They had friends. And you're talking this kind of rubbish. And for me, that's also like the 9/11 conspiracy theorists. It's the same thing. There's 3,000 people were murdered in that.
Right.
They all had, wives and uncles and aunts and, husbands and family. And you're saying it was the government. Oh my God. George Bush was in charge at the time. And do you honestly think George Bush could, no disrespect to people in America, but my God, but they forget about that. They forget about that. But there you go.
And you look at Heaven's Gate,
yeah.
and that was just such a prime example of lost souls in a cult that are looking for anything, and then that, the fatal story on air, talking about the comet and the spaceship. And, at the end of the day, people committed suicide. A lot of people did. And that was a really horrific thing. And yet, who takes responsibility for promoting that false story? I mean, if I would have promoted that story and lives were lost, I couldn't live with myself. I would have a really hard time with that, but I guess.
Well, is that not why certain people outside of the UFO community call us cultists? They look upon the UFO people, those involved in it en masse, and they say, well, it acts almost like a cult at times. Not all of it, but lots of it. And you have to say, well, they might, they're not wrong, are they? They might well be right. But let's hope it doesn't have those same disastrous endings. It will ride out the storm. I'm sure it will change at some point, because that's the way the UFO subject does. A lot of people look at what happens here and now, Erica, or recent things anyway, but they don't look back in history. We've got since, we'll call it 1947, and we can see how the UFO phenomenon and how it's been dealt with has evolved down those decades and changed, and it will continue to change. And in 20 years' time, it'll look completely different to what it does today. What it will look like, I've no idea, but it will. I guarantee it will look completely different. Because there's people like me can go back in time when I first started, and it was completely different then to what it is today. So,
where is it? Because you still hear the recycling of MJ12.
Well, there's bits of it you do. Bits of it will all. I mean, we still hear about Roswell when we've heard about that from day one. So there will always be remnants that will echo throughout history. But en masse, I'm talking about, again, we're looking at individual things there. I'm saying, look at it all. After Kenneth Arnold, the argument was, I think it's our machines, or is it the Russians? They didn't want to admit at first, don't talk about, beings from another world, because nobody will take us seriously. So then, of course, Keogh and co come along, and that's exactly what they do talk about. But they then said, don't talk about alien abductions, because nobody will take us seriously. Then, of course, along comes Betty and Barney Hill, and that changed. So it changes like that. It does. It evolves. I did a talk to somebody last year. I can't remember who the hell it was. And they said, where have all the Space Brothers gone?
Right.
From the 1950s.
Back to Germany. Yeah.
Where have all the Space Brothers gone? In other words, people don't report things today like they used to do. My book last year, UFO landings in the UK. There's some really bizarre things in there that we don't get anymore. Why is that? Same with our recent book, which I hope we might get to chat about at some point.
We will. I'm sorry. This is such a great conversation, though.
Beyond Reasonable Doubt, the Pascagoula Alien Abduction. Well, that year, 1973, was known as the year of the humanoids. There was a flap across the United States, the likes of which there's never been before or since. Why is that? Don't know. Just don't know. So things do change, and they will change. Whether it's for the better or not remains to be seen.
Yes, that will remain to be seen. And I've got to go back because Steve asked a question a long time ago in chat, and he wanted to know if there are any collections of Quest available online.
There may be at the Archives for the Unexplained in Sweden, AFU. They've been working with Isaac Coy a lot, who has uploaded, gigabyte after gigabyte of publications from around the world. And if anywhere, that's where you will find them. I know they did have some, because that's where I got some of my copies downloaded. I had a few physical copies as well that I'd saved. So that might be the place to look. Go and have a look at the AFU.
Okay. That's great. So I'm sure, I know Steve will do that. And I want to go back and just look at some of the other questions. Peter wants me to ask you any substance to reported UK hotspot, Bonnybridge, Scotland.
Oh, Bonnybridge, yeah. Again, in the 1990s, for whatever reason, it's just if you drive to Scotland and you go across the border, it's not that far. It's not way up in the north of Scotland, but it's not in the borders. And for whatever reason, a lot of people around Bonnybridge area, it's not a big place by any stretch of the imagination, started to report things. Some were clearly the local airport from Glasgow. You know, I have no doubt about that. There was some film taken. Again, you've got to be honest, it was aeroplanes. But there are other things that don't seem like that. And my colleague Malcolm Robinson was one of the main investigators there. Malcolm's from that area. And they had the local councillor, Billy Buchanan, raise the profile of these things. And he even insisted at the time that he wanted Margaret Thatcher to look into it. You know, Billy was just getting publicity for himself, I think, but for the area as well. You know, if you can draw attraction to your small little town, why not? And I don't blame him. And Malcolm and I did a one-day conference there back in the day, and it was absolutely packed, Erica, and I mean packed. There was people almost fighting to get in, literally.
Wow.
And and so something went off in Bonnybridge. It was a hotspot, if that's the right word you want to use, for a while, but then it's gone again. And again, that's another question. Why do we get places around the world that from time to time will have a lot of sightings come from them, like Bonnybridge, like the Yorkshire Dales in the 80s, like Hessdalen in Norway? And the answer is we don't know. And I've always asked this question as well. What comes first, the UFO investigator or the UFO reporter?
Right, that's a great question.
And again, I don't know the answer to it. I really don't. It's like that old saying, isn't it? If a tree falls over in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it, will it make a noise? You know, and so I don't know. But Bonnybridge was indeed a hotspot, and there were some interesting accounts come out of it, but it's not anymore.
Thank you. I know that Peter is very happy that you answered that, and Peter asked some great questions. Always, and now Drew has another question for you. What was the reason behind sending your material to the National UFO Historical Records Center instead of AFU?
Well, I got to know David Marler, the executive director. I had already given things to the AFU. Klaas Svan, who's the head of it, has been in my house. You know, he was on one of, I call him the Vikings of raiding when Klaas comes to the UK. He was on his travels around the UK. He came here and I took him out for dinner, and I gave him some material that, you know, I just thought I'll donate it. It sat there doing nothing, but I kept the bulk of it. I got to know David via another project we were working on and become on friendly terms with him. And I had to make a decision, Erica. You know, I've been ill for decades. I have a serious heart complaint. I'm just about to become an old age pensioner officially in April. My wife's no longer not interested in the subject. My children aren't. So what do I do with it all? You know, it had to go somewhere. And I just happened to say to David, would you take it? And it just came up in a conversation one day. It'd been on my mind for several years. I talked with a number of colleagues around my age group, and we all had the same thing. There is nowhere in the UK we can donate it where we know it will be safe for posterity. And David said, yeah, are you sure? I said, yeah. So I boxed it up and off it went last year, and he has it all there. And I'm still on very good terms with Klaas at the AFU. In fact, I'm working on a little project that might develop with the AFU. I'll say no more than that. It's in its early stages. What I will say to anyone who has an archive or a collection is donate it. Don't leave it too late. I'm not going to tell you. Well, to whoever you think may be the best place for it. But whatever you do, don't leave it until it's too late.
No, that's absolutely true.
Because I've seen it go in the trash, Erica. I've seen archives end up as landfill.
Yeah,
you know?
It is so sad. And you hear stories, and I know that, Dave has done a wonderful job over the years and is really working hard. And I know that there are other people across the United States that have great, that care very much, that have commercial spaces, that want to do the digitizing and things and want to work in a cohesive group. And I think that's a really important thing to do. I know Smiles Lewis has done things down in Austin, and I appreciate that. And so it is important to make sure that different holdings are going to places that have, this the capacity to store it in safe conditions, that have the capacity to digitize it and make that freely available to the public, and then also places, as I mentioned earlier, that don't have skin in the UFO game, that are going to be like any other archive, a professional archive, like at the University of Utah. They are taking all of the information. All of the information is available. It isn't cherry picked, as I've mentioned a million times. It is all of the information. That is what an archive, that is the responsibility of a historian and an archive. That those are really important things to remember. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a very good friend of mine called John Hanson. John has the most amazing collection anywhere in the UK. And somebody said, why didn't you give it to John? But I said, well, that's all right. But John's going to come a time with John when, what does he do with it all? He's older than me. And his daughter might take it. But then his daughter will at some point face that decision, So you need to donate it somewhere where it's going to be looked after, it's going to be treasured, and at some point will be made available. And I don't say to anybody, send it here or there or there. I just said, send it somewhere. Do not leave it until it's too late. It's like Stan Friedman's material is all at a local university. And Dr. Mack's material is somewhere else. I accessed it. Dr. Sprinkles is at the university in Wyoming, which I accessed. I contacted them online and I got a few bits and pieces from them. So an old friend of mine called George Fawcett, who lived down in North Carolina. George had a huge collection. I stayed with him, and he donated his to the museum in Roswell. And at least he donated it somewhere. That's the point.
And I had heard that he had, I think from Jen Aldrich, that they had taken a lot of that his archive, his holdings, and maybe thrown some of it away, but that all of it was not available. And some of the things that weren't available were more of his far right racist kind of bent.
Well, I never heard any of that from George. George was a sweet, gentle man. I never heard any of that from him.
Interesting.
So I can't comment on that. All I can say is, and he came and stayed with me and his wife Shirley, and it was a twin. So George did a lot of book reviews, and he always used to get two, one for him and one for his twin. And I found him to be a lovely man. And it's a little story, but my wife and I visited her sister in Canada, and we got delayed en route, and the airline gave us some free vouchers for flights. Now, this was a point where George, living in North Carolina, wanted to donate his stuff to Roswell, New Mexico. It was a long way away, so I gave him the vouchers so he could fly to New Mexico and back and arrange it in person. And of course, his collection was, I think, transported by van or truck across the US eventually. But the point being, he made the decision to donate it. That's the whole point.
Right. I think, that's important. I mean, families get sick of this topic. As it's like your wife had an interest and that was great. But at some point in time, families do tire of that. Yeah. It's a very special passion that we have. And so it is important to have a plan of attack for where things will go to preserve them and to hopefully see the light of day again. So somebody younger can come into this and then learn from the history and the experience of a particular investigator. I think that's really critical to ever wanting to advance the subject, but I think it's great. And I also, absolutely. And I want to say too, as somebody here in America wanting to work with other archivists. I think that, I've made some great connections with people that have different holdings across the country. And I think that's important to say that, if somebody has something and you're in this area and you're closer to that area, let's make sure we're working with another, archivist who is going to say, yes, this is a great idea. I don't have the capacity to scan things right now. I'm full. So let's get it over to another safe place instead of this kind of continual hoarding of information. I think it's really important that there's a cohesive system.
I think this eventually will have to be looked upon commercially as well, Erica, not to make money, but to preserve the collections. And as you say, have it digitized. You as an individual can only do so much, and I know you've got colleagues involved, but you can only do so much. If you sat all day by a scanner, how much are you going to do? Whereas industrial scanners can fire through things like no tomorrow. So there may come a time when there will have to be a commercial venture set up somewhere by someone, not to make money, but to make this work as almost like a UFO history location, and things is scanned and produced. I mean, you've got to go through, if it's certain documents, you've got to redact them. I mean, how long does it take you to redact a file? If there's a couple of 100 pages in, you've got to take names and addresses out. Take forever. So there's only a commercial aspect to that where people are paid to do it. For example, the Associated Press here, the press office, Press Association, they had an office in Leeds and still do. And I went for an interview for a job there, and it was to be a scanner, because they had all these physical copies of newspapers sat there gathering dust, and they had to be digitized, but professionally. They then used it commercially, of course. But if you'd have tried to do that on your own, or a little group of you, some little archive, it would never have happened, So I think sooner or later that will have to come into, and there's nothing wrong with that,
Right.
It will need, like this Brendan Frugal chap, instead of wasting his money on this rubbish that Skinwalker runs, do something productive, and invest in something like that. That to me would be a benefit to the whole UFO community.
Right, absolutely. And I want to go out there and just say, if anybody would like to donate, and you have, Philip, thank you so much, to Expanding Frontiers Research. We have scanners here, but we do need a high-speed scanner, and there are so many gems here. I absolutely love it, and I want to make sure that does get out to the public. So yeah, great things. I love it. We're also kind of getting to a point, though, where the older generation, unfortunately, they're not going to be around forever, and so there will.
Why were you looking at me when you said that?
No, I'm not. I'm thinking about me. I mean, I need to get a grip on my files, right? Because this is whoever has the luxury of getting my files is going to be in for quite a treat. But we are getting to the point where there aren't going to be paper files anymore, because a lot of the older investigators, unfortunately, are passing away. And so it will kind of ramp up, but then it will come to an end. And now we're looking at, going back to the 80s, and we've got 90s, different things that are already digitized.
But it's right in what you say, Erica. And I'll give you an example. Since 2018, I was working with Calvin Parker, the Pascagoula case, assisted by Dr. Irena Scott in Ohio, in the States. And
just show her picture right there.
There she is. And most of the new information we've got is all digital. It's been sent to us digitally. I literally have a small box of some paper files. That is my last remaining file at home. It's on the Pascagoula case. It's just a small box. The vast majority of it is digital. So what I've done literally in this last week, and it has arrived, I put everything I had on the Pascagoula case on a portable hard drive, and I've sent it to Irena.
Great.
So she now has a copy of everything that I have, and she's got it, and it works. It's fine. It'll take her a while to sort through it, but she has a copy of it. And what we do in the future, if I get any new information or she gets any, she just sends it to me and we put it on that particular drive. So that, from an archivist point of view, will make things easier in the future. You know, if you have your archives up and running, whether they're interconnected or not, I tend to think at some point, I'm always the optimist, Erica. I think they will be. You know, they will be linked in some respect, but it will be digitally, of course. And that when you digitize things, you automatically say, right, this goes to them, and them, and they all do the same. You know, they all work, you know, hand in hand. And so, like you said, new material will not be, it was not on paper anymore. It's all digital. Even some of the stuff we found was on paper files. It's been digitized,
right.
You know, and we've got that. So, yeah. So that's something for the future. And of course, it makes the job easier. You don't have to sit by a scanner, do you? You know?
No, because I'm telling you that it does a number on your shoulder. I had no idea, you know, scanning when Jan was here, especially we were scanned for 11 days straight and it was just twist up, you know, and I was like, oh, wow.
Yep.
But I love it. There are just so many gems. And I think we're on the home stretch of that as far as the paper files go. I've got to ask you before we talk about Pascagoula, though, what do you think the role has been historically and is now with the intelligence community and their involvement in the UFO subject?
Well, you know, sometimes I think it's an insult to use the word intelligence because they don't always act that way, you know. The disclosure lobby, and it's nothing new, you know, we've had this same thing with a different name since day one. Donald Kehoe, for example, Major, there was a Major, let's not forget that, Major Donald Kehoe said the same thing, that the US government knows all about UFOs, they are aliens from another world, there is a cover-up, and we want them to tell us. That, to me, is just trying to reinforce your belief system. We have no evidence that any government has this type of material. They will have documentation, we know that. If you look at our own Ministry of Defense, all of their UFO files are now at the National Records Office in Kew. And time after time after time, they admit that there are things that they cannot identify. But as they've posed no threat to the defense of the United Kingdom, they're not interested until they do. Mm-hmm. So, I got to be fair. I don't. There's another department behind the scenes that, on occasion, used to look at a few UFO reports every year. I'm talking a handful. They were called DI 55, Defense Intelligence 55, and we've known about it for quite some time. For example, what kicked off recently was the Calvine photographs. Mm-hmm. One was uncovered by Dr. David Clark. Mm-hmm. DI 55 investigated that case. But they weren't looking for aliens, Erica. They were quite objective about it. But they were looking to see if it was the Russians. Turned out it was probably you guys, the Americans. You know, nothing sinister, but, you know, so they were looking at it purely from a defense point of view. Is this the Russians? Because across the North Sea, on occasions, the Russian aircraft and our aircraft play cat and mouse, you know. It's happened for a long time. So they were looking at UFO reports to see if it was the Russians. And of course it wasn't, you know. But on occasion, they did look into certain cases, but only a handful. But again, if you go through your archive, or David Marler's, or mine, we have got some fantastic reports that no matter how skeptical or how objective you want to be, at the end of the day, leave you scratching your head. And you say, I don't care who this report was sent to, be it me, my next door neighbor, the local UFO group, or the Department of Defense. It's the same thing. And nobody can figure it out. Because what we have to remember as well, we don't investigate UFOs. We investigate reports of UFOs. So by the time we get there, it's been and gone. It's over with, you know? And that's the same no matter who reports it to. And again, we go back to 2017 with the New York Times famous article and the 3 videos that were released, you know, the Tic Tac, the Go Fast, and the Gimbal.
Mm-hmm.
These were filmed by Top Gun Navy pilots in aircraft that were each cost $100 million and more to build. But what do we get from them? We get 3 fuzzy blobs. That's what's on those pics. That's what you see.
Right.
You get 3 fuzzy blobs. But on the other hand, when these same types of aircraft go into combat, proper combat, and they have their smart missiles and etc., they can see people's faces in the streets.
Right.
You know, they can see a van driving and that's got a terrorist in it, and we're going to blow that van up. Boom, see you later. But yeah, we got these 3 UFO videos. Quite frankly, if they'd arrived in your inbox, Erica, from someone who filmed that on a mobile phone or cell phone, as you call them, you would have said, "Oh my God, you know, what have they sent me this rubbish for?" You know, it's but because it's a naval aircraft, you know, with a naval aviator, it has to be something special. It's not 3 fuzzy blobs. So what I'm saying is it doesn't necessarily mean that the intelligence services have anything more than we do or have anything better. They have much of the same. And it could be, rather than what the disclosure lobby are trying to reinforce, it could be that they're as puzzled as the rest of us when they have a few accounts that they are left scratching their heads, you know, and they are, because it's been and gone. There is nothing to put under the microscope, Erica. There is no alien in a fridge. You know, we don't have that.
Well, that's later tonight.
Well, there you go. You know, in fact, I do have an alien in my garage, but it's a model and it's full size. But that's
just think of the things you could do with that. Oh man, I'm telling you, those Stan Romanek videos gave me ideas. In fact, you know, you could do the.
So
what did he have? The flying pencil. Do you remember that? That was great.
But so, you know, and what I've also tried to point out to the disclosure people, let's assume you're right. Okay, let's assume we are being visited by beings not of this earth. Forget about how they've got here. That's aside for now. Whatever the UFO phenomena is, it's global. It knows no international borders. It's reported, you know, all around the world at some point or another. So if there's going to be an announcement, which is what they're trying to say, we want the government to admit this. Right. Who the hell's going to make the announcement?
Jeremy Corbell.
They want a government official.
Do they?
Well, that's
I'm not sure.
So well, let me just put this to you. For example, would President Biden be good enough? President Biden has his detractors. They say he's too old. He falls asleep all the time, you know. Or would it be Donald Trump? Donald Trump has his detractors, you know, saying he's a misogynist, he's a crook. So if either one of those, there would be an opposition to it, would say, and he's saying this because he's trying to get out of this, he's trying to draw attention from, right. He's been on the fiddle here, or he's fallen asleep. Okay, let's take them out of the equation. Would it be the United Nations? Well, people say, well, they don't represent every nation on earth, and they're a talking shop. They can't enforce anything. And they had a talk about UFOs back in the 1970s, and nothing came of it. Would it be the Pope? Well, not everybody's a Catholic. I think it's about 1 billion Catholics. So, you know, the Catholics have their counterparts, their nemesis. They would say, I don't believe him. So no matter who you chose to deliver that message, Erica, it would have its opposition. People would be against it for one reason or another. And people forget that. You know, this would have to be a joint international declaration. If we were to say that we have found evidence of beings from another world that visited us, you know, it couldn't be one man or one country. This would have to be truly international. It's a bit like the film, one of my favorite science fiction films, The Day the Earth Stood Still. Mm-hmm. Klaatu has a message for mankind, not just for America. And he insists on meeting representatives of all of mankind. this would be the kind of thing in reverse. We would be saying, you know, Plato's been here, and we're now going to take. The closest we ever came to anything remotely similar to that was Bill Clinton, when they found this meteorite from Mars, and it had what they think may have been a microfossil, so fossilized bacteria. And bacteria is life, irrespective of where it's come from. Life is life in all its different forms. They didn't quite go that far, but that's the closest we've ever came, you know. So who would you choose to deliver that message? And whoever you did choose, it would be denied. People would not believe it.
And who would you choose to interact with another?
Well, exactly. Can you imagine what would happen?
There are lots of incredible questions that really do deserve thought.
Well, the point being, Erica, it's not as simple as that people would have us believe. The disclosure people.
Right.
Tell us. We know you've got this. We know you've got aliens. We know you've got proof of this. Tell us.
Yeah, Jackie Gleason told us, so we better believe that.
Well, I would go back in time. I'll go back to Roswell. And you know, I'm not the greatest SWAT on Roswell. People know a lot more about it than me. But I always ask this question: if Roswell was a vehicle from another world that crashed, how the hell did we know that? And not only that, how did we know to cover it up within a matter of hours? And not only cover it up then, but cover it up ever since. Because you go back to 1947, the Cold War was just kicking off. You know, America was the only atomic bomb nation on Earth. Truman was in power. And what do we know about politicians, Erica? They like to leave their mark on history, don't they? You know, our last decent president was probably Tony Blair, and he wanted to leave his mark in history. Sadly, it was the war in Iraq, which was a real blot on the landscape. So here you have in 1947, President Truman. He had an opportunity to cement his name in history forever. That's being the man that announces we have visitors from another planet. Sadly, they crashed on arrival and died, but they crashed on American soil. You know, not in Russia, not in Japan, but on American soil. Aren't we great? You know, they came to America. And behind the scenes, you could also be saying in the back channels to the Russians, don't you guys mess with us, because we've not only have we got our nukes, guess what these guys brought with them? You know, and there would be no way to disprove that, would there?
Right.
You know, but that opportunity did not happen.
That's a great point.
And of course, if you look at Roswell, you then have to say, well, they would need teams of specialists from a whole variety of disciplines to study it. Where is all the paperwork? Where are all those people? And the answer is they're not there. And people like Stan Friedman just say, well, just because we haven't found them doesn't mean they aren't there. Well, I'm sorry, Stan, but it does. It's the opposite way around. You know, it's not there until you do find it. And so it's just a puzzle to me. I'm not ruling anything out, Erica. It's just a puzzle. What I'm saying is that whether we look at individual cases or parts of the UFO topic as a bunch, it's not as simple as one might imagine. It's not as simple and straightforward. Same with the disclosure thing. It's not, okay, Joe Biden comes out next week and holds a press conference. And I said, yeah, but I looked into this and you were right, guys. Well, you got an election coming up in the States. They're saying he's just trying to get votes. E.T. vote Biden. You know, you can see the placards now, can't you? You know what I mean? Do they honestly think that's going to happen? No. There you go.
Right. No, and I think that's great. I often just look at the disclosure movement and think, I mean, first of all, you know, how long has that been around and nothing? It's like this kind of, you know, dangling carrot and, oh, it's coming. Wait a minute. Just kidding. You know, I mean, we've heard it for decades and nothing has come out of it, but yet they're, you know, becoming more mobilized and they're, you know, this distrust of the government is building and yada, yada, yada. It's just all.
But again, you have to realize that one of the jobs that our government has to do is keep secrets. That's part of what it should do. And it's not necessarily the information that they keep secret, Erica, it's how they've obtained that information in the first instance. You know, the intelligence channels, the information could be absolutely worthless, but they cannot reveal it because it would give away how they've obtained it in the first place, which they don't want their enemies to know. That's part and parcel of government. You know, we have the Official Secrets Act here. This is true. This is a true story. A friend of mine was a manager in a textile mill. They made cloth. And he was part of the Yorkshire UFO Society, and he says, I've signed the Official Secrets Act. And I said, bugger off, you work in a mill. You know, he says, no, we actually make cloth that is used for military dress uniforms. And as a result, I had to sign the Official Secrets Act. I said, well, is that cloth something special? He says, no, we sell it to other places as well. But because we sell it to the government, he had to sign the Official Secrets Act. So just because he signed the Official Secrets Act don't mean he knows anything secret. Right. You know, that's how ridiculous it is.
And, you know, that's what I just have to say, too, is it's, you know, you've got people in the UFO world who emerge and they're quote unquote whistleblowers, and they have this opportunity in front of, you know, Congress to or subcommittee, you know, to give out information, and they completely don't do it, but they do it on a lesser known media channel. And it's like, you know, there's so many red flags to all of this. And I think one thing I would tell people, you know, if you're digging into this subject, just because somebody claims that they have military credentials does not mean that they do. And if they do have those military credentials, it might not mean as much as you think or they say it does.
Yeah, and so I mean, again, they might well believe what they're telling you, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, anybody can make up a story, can tell a story, you know, and it doesn't mean it's true. It doesn't mean it's a lie either. It's just a story. It's the way things work. It's the way myth and legend work as well, Erica, which are all stories. But, you know, so a true whistleblower, in my humble opinion, is someone like Edward Snowden.
Yes.
He knew what the risks were, but he put it all on the table. And he could have gone to jail for it. But he didn't. In the end, he didn't. I know he was in an embassy for some while, you know, but he put it all on the table. And I would say to people like Mr. Grush, if you are, you know, telling the truth, then the only way to protect yourself, because he claims his liberty or his, you know, his pension or whatever might be up for grabs, but is to go public. Is to put it all on the table. That's the safest place for you to leave your information. Is in the public domain, and there's nothing anyone can do about it. And they can't snatch you off the street because it's too late. The information's out, you know. And until that day happens, then, you know, I'll take what he has to say with the greatest of respect, with a pinch of salt.
Absolutely. And, you know, you look at people like, you know, Bob Lazar and some of these quote unquote whistleblowers over the years, and you think, you know, why hasn't somebody, if he really had the secrets to the kingdom, you know, the extraterrestrials, I mean, if there was anything of merit, I don't think that things would have rolled out the way they have. Let's just be real. And like I said, you could always fact check things. There are plenty of sites where you can go to dig into people's backgrounds and verify specific information and learn about the military. And, you know, those are things that we have to do, especially now more than ever, because people are putting forward claims, and then they've got a bunch of people, you know, the Corbells, the Knaps, people like that behind them. Oh, yes, you know, but no. So do your due diligence.
Well, I'll give you an example. When the MJ-12 documents first surfaced back in the 1980s, a well-known UFO author in this country, I won't mention any names, told me in no uncertain terms that he had received his copies of them from the best top source that he could ever wish for. You know, they came from this perfect source. And of course they were fake. You know, they were fake. So what, you know, where the hell is his source? You know, they were fake. They are a fraud. So just because someone said, I've got this from a source, I'm not saying they haven't, but it doesn't mean the source is not pulling your leg, mister. you know?
Right. And I mean, you could bet honestly, if there was something of merit to this, this would be, uh, it just wouldn't roll out the way it has rolled out time and time again. So it's very, very interesting. But we've got to talk about Pascagoula because I want to make sure that we do this, and I want to show the this book cover, which I really, really like the book cover. Who did the artwork?
That's done by a chap by the name of Mark Randall in the United States. Mark's done we've done several Pascagoula books, and he's done the artwork for them all. And it's very creepy, but also leaves it open to interpretation, I think.
I like it. Oh, that's very cool. That is very cool. Okay, so give us the rundown for people that don't know about the case. Just give us a brief synopsis.
Yeah, on October the 11th, 1973, Pascagoula River in Mississippi, two friends, Charles Hickson, age 42, and Calvin Parker, age 18, were working together in the shipyard. It was Calvin's first day at work, actually. And they both enjoyed fishing. So Calvin's driving home at night, and Charlie said, "Do you want to go fishing tonight, son?" "Oh, yeah, great." They have some dinner, get the fishing tackle, some bait, and off they go. Calvin did not know this area. He was from Laurel. And he recently got engaged to be married and had got a job working with Charlie in the shipyard. The idea he would live there 5 days a week and then come home on a weekend. So it was his first day. So he didn't know the area. So Charlie's directing him just off Highway 90 in Pascagoula. They drive down by the river. There's a lot of trash dumped there, or there was at the time. And they park the car up. On their way in, they passed a no entry sign. Calvin wasn't happy about that, but Charlie said, "Don't worry about it, son." So they set up on an old pier. There was a shipyard that had closed, and it had a little old rickety pier that was still there. So they're fishing away. And out of the blue, literally, these lights, these blue lights come from behind them, go out across the water. Calvin thinks it's the police. "We're going to spend the night in jail. I know we shouldn't have been trespassing." As they both turn around, it wasn't the police. They see this rugby ball shaped object descending, two lights on the left-hand end. It stopped about 2 feet above the ground. Then this opening appeared. The light from that poured out of it was blinding. They had to shield their eyes. These three humanoid figures appeared and again didn't touch the floor. They literally glided towards them. They described them as being about 5 foot tall, head, no neck, pointed protrusions out of the side and one out of the front, long arms with pencil-like appendages. Their legs were stuck together. They never moved. They were grey in colour, and their skin, if that's what it was wrinkly, like that of an elephant. Both men were absolutely terrified by this sight. Two got hold of Charlie. One got hold of Calvin. They were there instantly immobilized. The only thing they could move was their eyes. They're taken into this thing. Charlie goes to the right, Calvin to the left. Calvin's placed on a transparent table. This ugly creature, as he called it, stands still. And a woman appeared, pretty much looking almost human, apart from she had long middle fingers. She poked these down his neck, down his throat, and he had this sound in his head that said, "We're not going to hurt you." They removed his lower clothing and his shoes and socks and stuck something in his foot. He said it hurt. This thing came out of the ceiling and went around him as if scanning. Charlie said he was suspended. Not on a table, he was just suspended. He didn't see any female. This thing came out of the wall. He said it looked like a big eye. It went around him and then went back in again. Both men were deposited back on the pier, and Charlie staggered, and Calvin was literally stood with his arms straight out like that. Charlie shook him. "Are you all right, son? Are you all right?" And they turned around, this thing, zip, and gone. And they were both frightened out of their wits. They decided that they were not going to tell anyone. Calvin's due to get married in November. His fiance was only 16, so they needed parental permission. And he said, "My father-in-law will not let me marry her. If you hear about this crazy story." They get back to Calvin's car, which is brand new. They open the passenger door, all the glass falls out. It took Calvin at least 20 attempts to start it. So they set off to go home. Charlie, who'd been in the army and had fought in Korea, had a change of mind en route. He said, "We got to tell somebody, son. What if they do this to somebody else? What if this is the start of an invasion?" So they pull in at a little store that had a payphone, and they phoned Keesler Air Force Base, which is just outside of Pascagoula. Keesler Air Force Base said, "We're not in the UFO business anymore. Ring your local authorities." Calvin's hurling obscenities at Charlie, saying, "Forget it, let's go home. I told you not to say anybody." But no, he phones the police, and it ends up with Jackson County Sheriff Department, who send a vehicle out and escort them into town. Both men are interviewed separately, and they are told, Erica, if this is some kind of trick, if you're up to something, you're going to be in big trouble. You're going to end up in jail. They then put both of them in a room together and leave them. Unbeknown to Charlie and Calvin, there's a tape recorder in the desk next to them. The deputy comes back 5 or 6 minutes later, takes something out of the desk. They don't know what it is. Goes back and plays it. This became known as the secret tape. And it's Charlie and Calvin still talking about what happened. Calvin is literally crawling up the walls. "I gotta get some pills. So the sheriff and his deputies tend to believe them. They send them home. There's nothing they can do. The sheriff says, "We won't tell anybody." They actually get up and go to work the following morning, and they're immediately summoned to the boss's office. And he said, "What the hell are you two been up to? The telephones won't stop ringing. I've got journalists outside." And until his very death last year, Calvin did not know how the story got out, but it did. So they are eventually sent to the Singing River Hospital. They have a quick checkup. They're fine. Somebody there says, "What about radiation?" Well, the hospital says, "We can't check for that." So the sheriff actually takes them to Keesler Air Force Base, who gave them the brush off the night before. Keesler run the Geiger counters over them. There's no sign of it. But they said, "While you're here, guys, why don't you tell us what happened?" So they do. And we actually have the full transcript of that conversation. They didn't have a tape recorder, but they had a stenographer who recorded it all. And we have a copy of the secret tape. Of course, on the Saturday after it, Dr. James Harder from APRO arrives, Hynek arrives. They stay for 2 or 3 days, have a press conference and say, "These guys are the genuine article, leave them alone." It goes on television. Charlie becomes the torchbearer. Him and Calvin had agreed. Calvin said, "The only way I'm going to talk about it is that I'm not going to tell him I went on board this thing. I'm just going to say I saw it, it come down, and these creatures came out, and I passed out. It's up to Charlie then. So Charlie says, I'll do that for you, son. He'll deal with all that." Cal went home, ended up in hospital, with emotional problems, shall we say. Got married. And I don't know if you can remember the TV series The Hulk in the 1980s area.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Well, Dr. David Banner was stalked by a journalist. And every time he'd almost catch up, he'd move on to the next town. He'd have a great adventure in between, of course. Calvin did that in real life. Calvin did that really. He took his wife and his children, and every time a journalist cropped up and recognized him, he'd pack up and they'd move along. And he did that for years and years and years until his wife, Waynette, said, "That's enough." Even she didn't know the whole story. So in 2018, I got the rights to republish Charlie Hickson's book that he wrote in 1983 with William Mendes, UFO Contact at Pascagoula. Charlie passed away in 2011. So I thought, if I can find Calvin and just get an interview, I can stick that, in the back of the book. Took me a few months. I tracked him down, and I spoke to him on the phone. He was very polite, but it obviously didn't want to tell me an awful lot, So I arranged to speak to him again, and I did. And then there was a little change in his attitude. What I didn't know is behind the scenes, his wife, Waynette, they'd been to a funeral, and Charlie had signed the book of condolence, and people behind him saw his name, and it was like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So Wayne X said, look, why don't you write a goddamn book? And that's it. And then, of course, I come along and he mentioned this to me. And I said, well, Calvin, you know, I can help you. And I sent him a draft contract. And he said, I'll agree to do it on one condition, Philip. I said, what's that? He says, you don't change anything in it. He says, every time I spoke to a journalist, they would change the story. It wouldn't be accurate. It'd make me out to be an idiot or a nutcase or a religious lunatic. So I said, he says, you're not even allowed to change the spelling mistakes in it. So I said, okay. So we published his book in 2018 and it was a success. The only complaint we got about it actually was the spelling mistakes in it, but that was down to Calvin, you know. But what did happen, Erica, other people started to come forward. They'd seen Calvin now interviewed and treated with respect, whereas back in 1973 they were laughed at. So some people came forward, and we found others via different ways, and we started to build up a collection, if you like, of other witnesses, some who were literally on the river that night. One gentleman's driving across the highway bridge and sees the blue UFO down below him. Well, that's exactly where Charlie and Calvin were. We have another gentleman working on the other side of the river in the shipyard in his crane. He was a crane operator. He said, I could see this darn thing out across the river, Philip. Never seen, not in the sky, out across the river. And he watched it for some minutes. But the main witnesses that came forward were Mr. and Mrs. Maria Blair. The Blairs were on the other side of the river. Mr. Blair was going out on a boat. That's Maria. And he worked on the oil rigs. And the boat was there to take them out, but his boss was late. So they're sat in the car waiting. And she says she sees this thing come down the river and stops opposite them. And he's flying around this blue thing again. But she knew the area. She knew there was no airfield there, no helicopters or anything. And then they decided to go and put Mr. Blair's clothing on the boat. So they're walking down the pier in the dark. And there's a splash in the water next to them. And this creature comes out of the water right in front of Maria. And she called it the Grey Man. And it frightened the bejesus out of her. I mean, literally. It went back into the water, didn't come back up. She ran up to the boat and threw her husband's belongings on it. This was about 9 o'clock-ish. She then turned around and ran back to the car, but now it was midnight. So when her husband returned home from the oil rigs, he told her not to say anything. Anyway, come 2019, there was a little video online of Calvin being interviewed. And one of the comments underneath it said, my mum and dad were on the opposite side of the river that night. They too saw the UFO. And I saw that comment and I contacted this person. And I said, can we speak to your mum and dad? She said, I will ask. And they said yes, and that was Mr. Blair and Mrs. Blair. Initially, Mr. Blair was a bit reluctant. You know, he was, how can we say, a bit grumpy, you know. But Maria told us the story, and then as time went by, she told us a bit more. Then Mr. Blair took ill, seriously ill, and he was in the hospital. He had to have a small operation. He insisted that his wife Maria phoned me from the hospital. And he told me there and then, he says, Philip, I lied. I saw the thing that night. I saw the great humanoid. That's what he called it. I saw everything my wife said. And Mrs. Blair even filmed him. So he sat in his hospital bed with no shirt on, with his stickers on from having an ECG. He survived the operation, but he went on to tell his wife, Maria, that they had actually been abducted themselves that night. And he not told her because he wanted to try and protect her. He didn't want people to think they were nuts, you know. And he said that right until he died. I mean, Maria was as mad as hell with him. She had little glimpses of things, Erica, that didn't make sense. But once her husband started telling her this account, it filled in things. She eventually asked if we could put her under hypnosis. We declined. She asked again, so I arranged for it. I got a professional hypnotherapist who knew nothing about the subject. I didn't tell her what we wanted to know, just gave her a date, a time, and a location. She put Maria under hypnosis. We had it filmed as well. And she told us a little bit more. She even claimed the beings were interested in her eggs and DNA. They wanted to make creatures that could walk amongst us unrecognized. What she did say afterwards, after the hypnosis had finished, that she says the abduction was for the Blairs that night, not for Charlie and Calvin, because the Blairs were due to be there at that location and at that time. Charlie and Calvin weren't. They only decided to go there on the way home from work. They were like collateral damage, if you like. So eventually, I got Maria on video, and I sent a colleague of ours out in Mississippi some questions to ask her. And Maria said, I saw Charlie and Calvin being abducted. I saw this thing come down. She said, I thought it was men. I didn't know what the hell it was. I was that scared. I thought it was men doing this to them. You know, I saw this thing come down and these three things come out. I thought it was some kind of men. And she said, I saw them take them out and come back again. And make of it what you will, Erica. We found that, you know, again, these people didn't step forward. We located them. Had their daughter not made that comment, we would never have heard from them. And the story just grew and grew and is growing all the time. Our book was published on September the 1st. Since then, we've interviewed 3 new people, 3 new witnesses. You mentioned David Marler and his archive earlier. Mm-hmm. David, at the end of last year, acquired the APRO files. Out of the blue, Dr. James Harder, who was there at the time, was sent there by APRO. So David knew what I was working on. I'm hoping there's something in those files. Within a couple of weeks, David had emailed me, and there were 5 audio recordings there, all relating back to 1973. One is actually of Calvin Parker under hypnosis on October the 14th, 1973, by Dr. James Harder.
Wow.
There is Dr. Hynek interviewing the Sheriff Fred Diamond. There is James Harder holding a press conference. And there's another couple of bits and pieces. You know, there's no smoking gun, but it's additional historical information. So the case has just grown and grown and grown, Erica, and most of it's in the book.
And so I have to ask you, because I'm just seeing a couple comments in chat, you know, like we saw with Roswell, you know, there was really nothing for many decades about it. And then, you know, the case got popular again, and then you had more people coming forward with tales that are credible or perhaps not. So do you think that could be happening with this case?
Well, we can't rule that out. There could always be 1 or 2 that wanted to jump on the bandwagon, but there is no money involved here. There's, you know, there's no newspaper headlines for them. So that we can't always rule that out, but it's just the amount of them. Somebody asked me in an interview, how many witnesses are in the book? And I said, I don't know. I honestly hadn't counted them. And so I went and counted them, and there's about 40. That's a lot, you know, that is a lot. So there will be some of those that we could think, well, we could probably, if we want to be skeptical, we probably could rule them. What we did with the book is, look, this is everything we've uncovered. This is everybody we've interviewed. Here it is, you, the reader, you draw your own conclusions. What we are arguing is that if we took all this to court, we could prove that something really extraordinary happened that night. You know, some of that testimony may not be accepted. It might be put to one side, but the bulk of it was certainly. But you read it and see if you agree with us or not. And it's all there. You know, Maria's hypnosis transcript is in full. I know there are people who don't agree with the use of hypnosis, and I understand that. But it's something she wanted to do. We didn't ask, so we obliged. And had we not published it, and somebody found out about it, Erica, we'd be accused of holding information back or covering something up. So let's put it all in there and let people, you know, again, no picking and choosing here, no cherry picking what goes in and what doesn't. It's all in there, you know. There's 3 people in it, for example, who claim just next to where this thing has supposedly come down, there's some grass. And that grass is 6-7 feet tall. They were kids at the time. They were all different. They weren't together. There were different accounts. 2 kids, let's say, they went into this grass and they found part of the vegetation gone. Not cut, not burned, gone. Another young man who was 14 was driving over the bridge with his mum and dad, and he looked down and he said there was a big patch of the vegetation gone. And again, we've put all that in there. One of the guys, he went back to the location and took some photographs of him standing in front of the grass that is still 7 foot tall to this very day. So it'll give you an idea of what the location was like. So again, make up your own mind. Is that right or is it wrong? Yeah. So it's all there. There was a USO sighted in the river 2 weeks later, sighted by local fishermen and the Coast Guard. And they hit it with an oar and it went clunk. And we have that in the book. All the official Coast Guard documents are there as well. And we even interviewed one of the fishermen who was involved at the time. We found him and interviewed him. It was in the book. We found the doctor who examined Charlie and Calvin. God bless him, he was 90 years old. And he has since passed away. But we interviewed him twice, and his testimony is in the book. And, you know, it just grew and grew and grew, Erica, beyond anything we ever expected. It really did.
And that's just amazing. And I'm really looking forward to digging into the book. Thank you so much for sending a copy to our archive. I really appreciate that. That'll be a very special thing for me. And I have to ask you, you know, through the years, what kind of blowback did they receive? Because, you know, I mean, obviously you've got 2 young men coming out and making claims, wild claims. This is kind of in the same time period that you had the Travis Walton case and, you know, things like that. And so.
Well, I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Calvin wanted nothing to do with it. If he'd had his way, they would never have said anything to anybody. And every time he saw Charlie on the television or in the newspaper, he would curse. So we should stop goddamn talking about it, you know. Anyway, one time, Charlie persuaded Calvin to meet him at a TV station, not to go on, just to meet and have a chat. And Charlie said, I'm going on this television show with a scientist. And it's been arranged by this local journalist. So Calvin turns up and the TV show's been cancelled. And he said, why? He said, well, this scientist wouldn't agree to go on TV with Charlie. And the journalist is kind of in the middle of all this. So he's trying to, you know, be peacemaker. So they go over the road to have some dinner. And it turns out it wasn't a scientist. It was Philip Klass, arch debunker of the time, well known by, you know, everybody. So Calvin, you know, he's no idea who the hell he is. And he said to me, why would you not go on the television with my friend Charlie? He said, because Charlie's lying. So Calvin said, well, if you're accusing him of lying, you're also accusing me of lying. And he said, I don't care whether you believe me or not, but you're not going to call me a goddamn liar. And he told Mr. Klass in no uncertain terms what would happen if he ever called him a liar again. And Calvin said, we went home with no dinner, you know. So that's how they were treated, you know. There was one gentleman who we've interviewed for the book. He said he remembers watching it back on the television in 1973. And he said there were 2 channels covering it. One treated it okay. The other just made fools of them. And he said there was no way on God's earth was I going to take that risk of stepping forward and having them make a fool out of me, you know. But then we jump forward to 2018. The times have changed. Calvin, this time around, was accepted by the town of Pascagoula. They treated him with respect because they knew what kind of guy he was. And there's even a historical marker now at the location. Local charity in the town raised the money for it. It was unveiled in 2019 by the mayor. So it was a different kind of atmosphere, Erica. which allowed some people were also coming to that age where they couldn't care less anymore. I don't care if you want to make a fool out of me. I'm not going to be around for many more years. In fact, there's 3 of the people we interviewed for the book, are no longer with us. They passed away after we interviewed them. And so, but we found others. I'll give you an example. When Calvin's book came out, a gentleman from Greece contacted me. He was called Stephanos. And in 1981, so 8 years after, he was in the Greek Merchant Navy. And the ship he was on docked in Pascagoula. And he was also a UFO researcher, used to write for a Greek magazine. Stephanos got in touch with me and said, Philip, in 1981, I landed in Pascagoula. I interviewed Charlie Hickson, but I also interviewed this other chap. I went to the police station and they even told me how to find him. His name was Pastor Emmanuel Sigalis. And he still had a transcript of his interview with him. Now, what happened on that night, the pastor, along with a chap called Don Broadhurst, who worked for the Police and Probation Service, were attending a church-sponsored event for people with alcohol problems. And in the back of the car was a young lady with a church volunteer. They're driving out of Pascagoula when she sees this thing coming. The 2 men are in the front talking, and it came right over the road in front of them, heading down in the general direction of the river. And we have this interview with him. Mr. Broadhurst had passed away. Pastor Sigalis was no longer alive. But what about this young lady in the back of the car? So, like you said, sometimes you can help find people. We found her in a newspaper. There was one little mention of her name. Her name was Joanne Hallmark. We found an old black and white photograph of her from 1974. I think she'd worked as a teacher in Pascagoula for about a year. She wasn't a native. I found 2 social media accounts of her, Erica, that hadn't been used for years and years and years. So I left it. At some point later, I went back and I had another look. And on one of these social media accounts, it mentioned a church. And I took the name of that church and I Googled it. And hellfire, I found it. This church had a website. And on this website were some sermons you could download. The sermons were made by a gentleman called Hallmark. And I'm thinking, is this a husband or is it a son's even? The church had a generic email address, info@church or whatever. So I emailed them, said I was looking for this lady. She'd worked with Pastor Sigalis. That was about all I told them. If she's still around, could you pass my email on? About 3 or 4 weeks later, I get a reply, and it is from Joanne Hallmark. So now I have to tell her what I really want to speak to her about. So I do. Again, a few weeks go by. She confirmed everything. She gave us her telephone number. My colleague, Irena Scott, phoned her up, interviewed her. She even sent us an up-to-date photograph because we'd sent her the old black and white one we had. She found that really amusing. So here we have a lady who didn't come forward. We found her by a bit of investigation, a bit of detective work. So not all of the people, stepped forward. Some of them we managed to locate by our own means. And Mrs. Hallmark is a prime example of that. And another witness to the events in question. I can't hear you. You're muted.
I hate it when I do that, but I've made it this far. I'm so proud of myself. So I just have to go back because Peter had mentioned in chat that there was talk that they were dumping toxic waste there. Had you heard anything about that?
Well, there's all kinds of suggestions. What would toxic waste do? I mean, it wouldn't do anything. It would still be there today if it was that toxic. The 3 main ideas for what may have happened at Pascagoula was, one was it a hoax. And we could find no evidence of that whatsoever. I mean, absolutely zero. Joe Nickell of the Skeptic Society in 2013 wrote an article suggesting that they'd had a psychological episode. Well, third-party witnesses can't witness a psychological episode. But that's not Mr. Nichols' fault, because we hadn't located the other witnesses in 2013. So he wouldn't have been aware of them. So he's making an assumption based on not having the whole facts. But, you know, he's not to blame for that. The latest one I found was that it was the Russians. Oh, bugger me, the Russians are here again. And that the aliens were actually Russian submariners, you know, in their wetsuits and so on. Well, you know, the UFO wasn't over the water, it was on land, you know, and other people witnessed these events. So that, look, you know, Calvin was desperate to find an answer to what happened to him. If I could have given Calvin a conventional explanation, Erica, that covered all the bases, I would have done it, and he would have been happy. You know, he would have said, right, thank you, Philip. You know, we finally found out what happened. But we can't, and we couldn't. You know, there isn't any, even if you wanted to call it aliens, which Calvin did at times today, you got to call it something. He even thought it might have been demonic at one point in his life, you know, because it was driving him bonkers. You know, he was grasping at straws to try and find an explanation, and we couldn't find one. We haven't. I'm not saying there isn't one. All I'm saying is all the information we've gathered is there in our book. There may be people out there that are cleverer than I that can look at it and think, oh, well, have you thought about this, Philip? Well, you know, we're open to suggestions. Nick Redfern, a Brit who lives in the US, well-known author and researcher, he thinks it was some kind of military experiment where they were spraying airborne hallucinogens. Yeah, very dangerous thing to do when you're right next to Highway 90, you know?
Well, as we've seen before, things happen like that.
Yeah, I'm not ruling it out. I'm saying it's a theory. There's no evidence to support it, because other third parties, not in the direct vicinity, but around the areas, also saw what was happening, or parts of it. So they weren't part of any airborne hallucinogenics. Plus the fact, how did they know Charlie and Calvin were going to be there that night? This place was a dump. I mean, a dump. It's where people would go and dump their trash. Charlie and Calvin only decided to go fishing on the way home from work, you know?
So you don't think there would be anything to the, like a cover up for toxic dumping, and what they were saying were people in hazmat suits?
Well, no, because what we've realized with toxic waste, it usually ends up in one of the poorer countries of the world rather than the poorer communities of the world. You know, a lot of the stuff that we had, I think we imported it to India and dumped it there, or Indonesia, or some such place.
I wish that I could say the same here, but we have a lot of toxic dumping going on in our backyard, which is...
Yeah, but the United States is a huge, great country, Erica. I know there's 300 million people there, but there's still parts of the country where nobody has probably set foot. You know, if you want to dump toxic waste, there's plenty of spaces for it. You've got some of your lakes, they're huge. You know, Texas is bigger than Britain, you know, so there's plenty of places to dump stuff where you'll never find it, rather than right next to Highway 90 in sleepy little Pascagoula. You know, let's be honest about that. You know, that's why they built Area 51 where they built it, in the middle of. Have you been to Las Vegas?
Yeah, I've been to Area 51 on the outside.
Yeah, well, when you drive down to Las Vegas, it looks like somebody's got hold of a map and think, where the hell can we stick a city out in the arse end of nowhere? Oh, we'll stick it there in Nevada. There's nothing there. Boom. And that's what it's like. And the same with Area 51. There's nothing there. When I went to Roswell, they were proud of saying by the Roswell people, we're 200 miles from nowhere. You know, it weren't quite that anymore. I think there's been a bit of encroachment, but it is. So plenty of why did they explode the atom bomb out in the desert? You know, because there was nobody there.
To Utah, and we could have downwinders. I mean, which is what happened. I mean, it's like, no matter, you know, and I will say, you know, in Utah, we are not very good with our toxic dumping. In fact, we accept toxic waste from countries all over the world.
Absolutely.
Come to Utah, and we have communities that are experiencing some pretty severe health.
Wasn't the movie Erin Brockovich about poisoned water or something of that nature? If my memory serves me correct, yeah.
So you never know. That'd be interesting. I mean, that's definitely an interesting angle that I would.
Well, one thing I've learned in this business, Eric, is never to rule anything out.
Right.
So if we had information that would support that, then we wouldn't, like we said before, we wouldn't cherry pick it. We'd examine it, and say, well, this makes sense, or it doesn't, or we need more information, and we put that out there. I've constantly said, we found this, we've interviewed this person, and out it goes, and anybody's free to comment it. I know I'm only limited to what coverage I can get for it, but that's the best I can do, and I'm quite willing to share the information with anyone.
Right. And I mean, and I appreciate that about you. And I know if I came to you and said, oh, wait a minute, I found, A, B, C, and D, that you would sit down and look at that. And I think that's one of, the things that we have to do in this subject. I mean, none of us are going to be right most of the time, to be honest.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So you can't learn and
like I said earlier on, just when you think you've gone down the right track, this subject has the way of saying, sorry, Philip, but you were wrong, and you start all over again. That's just the way it is sometimes. On other occasions, Erica, you think, well, yeah, this time I was perhaps right. But what we've done with the Pascagoula stuff, it is all there. Even, we had Calvin went under hypnosis again, and we have Calvin's transcript of his hypnosis in there. We found out that we published elsewhere that Charlie and Calvin went under hypnosis with Bud Hopkins at different times in different years, and we have those tapes, and we didn't know any of that when we started. We just came across them.
Do you think that's a good thing that they were went under hypnosis by?
Well, I asked Calvin about hypnosis in general. I said, do you think it's of any use, Calvin? He says no. I said, why? He said, well, I remember everything anyway. But what we have to remember is that they told the police, they told Hynek and Harder, everything right at the beginning, before there was any hypnosis, before there was any newspapers or any TV shows. They told Keesler Air Force Base most of it. So we've got information right from within hours of this incident happening. They're sat in the sheriff's office. And we also have the tape of Charlie being interviewed by the sheriff that night on his own. I've got it, and I've transcribed it, and he's telling them what happened. And this is within hours of it happening, before there's any hypnosis. So what you do, Erica, you can compare what Charlie's saying to the sheriff that night with the hypnosis from later, and see if there are any big discrepancies.
And have there ever been any discrepancies between what they initially reported and then as time has evolved?
A couple. I've got to be honest. If there's no discrepancies, then you should be very careful, be very wary that something doesn't add up. For example, the size of the object. They gave various sizes. And I asked Calvin about this. He said, Philip, I have no idea how big it was. I can only estimate it. He said, because the light from it was so blinding, we had to shield our eyes at some point, and we're squinting. So I thought it was bigger or smaller. He says, but if I'm honest, I don't know the size. I can only guess. There was nothing there like a lamppost sticking up that we could compare it with. It was, as tall as the lamppost or as wide as the road or whatever. There was none of that. It was a dump. The place was a dump. There's old TV sets lying in the grass,
What a place to go fishing.
Yeah.
Not my first choice.
Well, the reason they went there is because the old pier they fished off used to be a grain loading place. And every now and again, some of that grain got stirred up from the bottom of the river.
Oh, wow. And
it attracted the fish. But only Charlie knew that because he was local. Calvin had no idea. He in fact, he remarked to Charlie, this is a dump. What you brought me here for? He thought there's all this trash everywhere. So we explained that's why they were going there. So there was a reason. It wasn't just random. There was a reason why Charlie chose that spot. But yeah, there were little discrepancies. Sometimes those discrepancies may have been the newspaper reports that didn't quite report it accurately. And we've got tons of them. So you have to be careful. But the good thing is, from my point of view, is that Charlie and Calvin's stories are not identical. If they were identical, Erica, in every way, I would be extremely skeptical. but they are different, and they both reacted to the encounters differently. Charlie was able to deal with it, and he said he used his wartime experiences because he was under fire in Korea. There was times he thought he was going to die, whereas Calvin had no lifetime experiences. I don't think he'd hardly been outside of Mississippi, he'd nothing to fall back on. And Calvin was the tough guy. He had a brother called Rick. And he says, Rick was the brains and I was the brawn. If you mess with my brother at school, then you got me to deal with, But here you have an instance that happens when Calvin is totally helpless. He cannot fight back. And that affected him a lot. It really affected him a lot emotionally. He couldn't protect himself, which he'd never had that feeling before. He felt totally helpless. Whereas Charlie, he looked at it differently. He used his wartime experience. I survived the war. If I've been under fire, I can get through this, So yes, there are differences, there are discrepancies. And again, you'll read it all in the book, and you draw your own conclusions from it. But again, I would be more suspicious if there weren't any discrepancies. I really would.
Did you ever feel that Mr. Hickson was kind of exploiting Calvin or anything, or was there any resentment between the two of them over the years?
Calvin was very resentful. He didn't want him to talk about it. On occasion, Charlie would persuade Calvin to do something, and then afterwards he would regret it. And say he would curse. He'd see him in a newspaper and he'd say, I wish he'd shut up talking about it. Calvin had got his life planned out, Erica. He just got engaged to his childhood sweetheart, Waynette. So get married, have a regular job, get a house, children, grandchildren, retire. That was it, a very simple life. But that night of October 11th, 1973, changed that forever. That life was gone, Whereas Charlie, he looked upon it as being something special. Charlie became what we call a contactee. He had a couple of messages from the aliens saying that something big is going to happen on Earth for all mankind, positive. You're going to be part of it, Charlie. So he felt that he should continue telling people about this, that this was important.
Was that genuine, or do you think that was just him?
No, he believed it 100%. Absolutely believed it. He'd not be the first person like this to become a contactee. Betty Hill, went down that route as well to some degree. But he honestly believed it. And of course, nothing did happen. And even when my Greek friend Stephanos interviewed Charlie in 1981, he told him the same story. He thought something great was going to happen. And, but Charlie never made any money out of it. You bring him up to speak at your local church fair and he'd go. He wouldn't charge you any money, He tried every which way he could to get that story out there. He even made a record, Erica, a vinyl record.
Oh, boy.
And on that record is just Charlie talking, telling what happened. That's the days when you could go in a record store and record certain things and buy so many copies yourself.
Oh, that's probably what William Shatner and Leonard Nimoy did with Golden Throats.
And of course, Charlie's book never hardly sold a copy, In fact, in 2018, I found a place in Pascagoula that bought 2,000 copies of his book and never sold one. They were all still wrapped in cellophane in a shed. Wow. And they never sold a copy. And I got one of them. I got a copy that was brand spanking new, still in the cellophane from them, So he didn't make any money on his book either, unfortunately. But, different people, different ways of dealing with it.
Do you think, though, because I know, obviously there's not a lot of money in the UFO world unless you've got an agent and unless you're going on all the TV shows and that's your thing. But there are people that do seek out the limelight because it does something for their ego. It's it makes them feel important when they might be living an otherwise unimportant life in their mind. And so could there have been any need to do that for some sort of gratification?
I don't know. I didn't come across any of that. I mean, we interviewed Charlie's son, Eddie, because obviously Charlie's passed away in 2011. And Eddie said, you know, his mother was petrified of what might happen. It affected his mother more than anyone else. She was always looking over her shoulder thinking this might happen again. And Waynette, we interviewed Calvin's wife as well. She'd been with him right from the very beginning. And she got to the stage with him moving around when she said, enough's enough, Calvin. And they actually separated for a while. And she'd had enough of it. And she could tell us, you know, Calvin's frame of mind, the way he for example, he went out one day and they found him in New Mexico. He didn't drink, but he went on a 3-day bender and he phoned the insurance company up when he had life insurance and said, am I insured for suicide? And they said no. So he went to a cowboy bar and picked a fight with half a dozen cowboys in the hope that they'd beat the living daylights out of him and kill him, and his wife would get the insurance money because he was worthless. You know, his only worth was the insurance money for his wife. And of course, the cowboys did beat the living daylights out of him, but they didn't kill him. You know, so it's a, you know, that's all part of the story as well. You won't see much of that side of thing in the book, but it is part of the story. And make of it what you will. I mean, I found Calvin to be a lovely man, a great sense of humor, very simple man, but an intelligent man as well. And he would tell you things when he was ready to tell you. And I'll give you an example of how I found Calvin. In the months leading up to him dying, his mother was in a nursing home, and she got to the stage where she couldn't even recognize Calvin. Now, Calvin already knew at this point he was dying of kidney cancer, but on a Friday night, he used to go down to the nursing home with his guitar, and he would sing songs for the people in there to entertain them. That is the man that I know as Calvin Parker. Simple as that.
And it weren't there a couple of interviews with him from a local station right before he passed?
Yeah, he was interviewed locally. He became friends with one of the journalists on Fox 10 News. She's called Shelby Myers. Mm-hmm. And I let Shelby know that Calvin's days were numbered. I had her email address. He'd done a couple of pieces with her in the past, and you know, they become on friendly terms. And she went and spoke to him, you know, and he says, and it's very emotional, I'm dying. And I spoke to Calvin about a week before he died, and I said, you're not allowed to die. And this is why. I said, because your wife hasn't given you permission yet. You know, I said, she's still got some nagging to do, you know. And he laughed. God bless him, he laughed, you know. So but we knew it was going to be any day then when he died. And about a week later, he'd gone. And
I remember seeing that interview with him, and he was very emotional.
Yeah.
Very, you know, it's a very touching interview.
It is. We've also made a documentary that was filmed last year with a British company. It will be out sometime this year. And again, Calvin starts off, he says, I'm dying. I know I am. I'm just looking for an answer before I die. They interview his wife, Waynette, and she says, I don't know what I'm going to do without him. You know, whether that'll make the final cut, I don't know. It's nothing to do with me, but I've certainly seen those images. So that was very moving. And he was just an all-round lovely guy. You know, I can't comment on Charlie. I had no personal contact with him.
He seemed, you know, to me, my opinion of him, just watching him, I have some questions about. He seems not as genuine, in my opinion.
It was different to Calvin, you know, and he had his own thoughts about what had happened to them that were different to Calvin's, obviously, and it affected them differently. That's all I can say. You know, I didn't have any contact with him. We've only interviewed his son, Eddie. And Eddie said Eddie was actually in the Marines at the time, and he didn't know anything about it until it made the news media. So, the rest of them I think there's his sisters, Eddie's sisters are still around somewhere, but we've not been able to find them. But it doesn't mean we won't in the future, of course.
Well, it's also fascinating, and I think the one amazing thing, with now that I've got these wonderful archive here, all these files, like you can take a case that was investigated and closed and go back through it the more we know, and do digging in different directions, and you just never know what you're going to come up with.
Well, this is what I've been saying to people, Erica. When you're looking at cases, some that are historical in nature, we should be looking at archives like yours or others, or in people's loft or in their garage. They've got stuff lying around. We found a lot of these people by just a bit of detective work, and politely being a bit of a pain in the arse. I contacted you about what might be in your archive regarding Pascagoula.
Right, which I can't believe I didn't find anything. That's
but the point is, we won't know unless we ask.
Right.
My mother, God bless, is no longer with us. She had a saying, you'll never get lost, son, so long as you've got a tongue in your head. In other words, always ask. Be polite and ask. So every now and again, I will do exactly that. People will probably see my email and think, "Oh God, he's here again." But we know what he's looking for, and sometimes it pays dividends. They'll say, "Oh, I found this, Philip. I'm glad you've got in touch with me." Like David Marler, when he got the APRO files, he knew what we were already working on and had been for a number of years. He finds these tapes. He didn't go through the files just looking for stuff for me. He just happened across them. When he was trying to sort them out, and hey presto, within a couple of weeks we've got copies of them. So you go around, you might come across something and you're like, oh, this might be of interest to Philip. I'll send him this. For example, in just after we published the book, a lady called Chelsea Norton Prince of the Ocean Springs Historical Society contacted us. They have their own Facebook page, and she put a couple of things on there about the case. She'd met Calvin and bought a book off him. And one of their members, a lady by the name of Bethany, contacted Chelsea and said, "Chelsea, I have 2 boxes of documents that used to belong to Charles Hickson. Do you want them?" "You better want them." So as soon as she got them, she contacted me. I didn't know this lady, but she knew of what we were up to. What it was, Bethany's parents bought Charlie Hickson's house in 2011 when he died, and these boxes of papers were left in the house. And then a little time capsule, Erica. And in there is a couple of letters from Betty Hill to Charlie, because they'd met. So what did I do? I sent them to Kathleen Madden. I don't know if these are of any interest to you. I know you've written about your aunt.
Yeah.
But here you go. And what we do know is that there are other documents, because Bethany had more of these, but some years back she gave them away, and she can't remember who the hell she gave them to. So I've got them here actually. I have them all. We're talking about digitizing them. They're all on that thumb drive. And there's 1,500 documents on there. A lot of it is just general correspondence, Erica.
But I think the correspondence is honestly the most important thing.
Well, there's a letter in there from a NASA physicist. His name's there, his address is there. There's nothing redacted. And he said, "Charlie, I asked NASA to investigate your case, and they declined. They turned it down." And of course, what did we have last year? NASA saying we're going to set up our own UFO study. Well, good luck with that, And there's Bud Hopkins writing to me, Peter Robbins, just ordinary Joe public saying, "I saw you on TV, Mr. Hickson. I agree with you." And, or "Can I buy your book?" Or "Where, are you going to be speaking at such and such a place? We'll come down and see you." But it's a little time capsule. Well, what we know is that there is more of this information out there because Bethany gave it away.
Right. And that's
so that may crop up at some time, but unless we keep asking politely, we will never know.
Right.
Jog people's memories.
And I will say, and this is one thing that drives me nuts about certain historians in the subject is all they're looking for are case reports. This is the end all be all, and whatever, who cares about the correspondence? And that, to that I would say, if you don't care about the correspondence, then please send the correspondence to Expanding Frontiers Research, the archive here, because we care about the correspondence, because we found things that are incredibly important.
Absolutely.
Make more discoveries.
Well, what I did find in them is there were actually 5 letters addressed to Calvin Parker, but they went to Charlie's house. Because wherever they got the address from, they only got Charlie's. Calvin had never seen these letters. So shortly before he died, I scanned them and sent them to him. And they were kind of very fitting for the time, because one lady is saying, "We saw you on such and such a TV program, Mr. Parker, and I'm disgusted at the way that we, the American TV networks, treated you. I apologize on behalf of the television," and she's not part of the television company, just some lady watching it. So she's apologizing for the appalling way they treated him and laughed at him, So I wanted Calvin to see these before he died, and they are the only physical copies. I have those 5 copies.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Everything else is digitized, and they're in my little box. I told you I've got a little box. But I also found in it, again, it's of no great significance. It's just Charlie Hickson's badge from when he lectured at the MUFON Symposium in 1990.
Very
so
nice.
They have his badge. I've got it up on the wall here. Little memento.
I love those. I love that.
Well, they're history. They're a part of UFO history. They're a part of history of this case.
Yep.
And what will turn up next, Erica? I don't know.
I know, that's the great thing. I just have to say, I've got in Anne's holdings, it's really interesting because she has hundreds of tapes, as well. Some I've started to digitize, and, there's a great conversation with her and Dr. Jacques Vallée talking about James McDonald. And that is really interesting to hear both of them talking about that. And there's nothing like hearing a person's voice and inflection, because that's
it with the 5 recordings that David sent us. There's Hynek and the sheriff talking, and it's not a formal interview. I never met Dr. Hynek, so I have no idea what he was like, but he seemed like an easygoing gentleman, and he's just talking to him. He's not grilling the sheriff. He's not got him under the thumb, and I've only ever heard the sheriff's voice on other recordings. It's nice to hear him speaking in informal manner about what happened. For example, the sheriff said, "Oh, the guys at Keesler, they were already awake when we phoned them. They were ready and set up when we got there. There was no messing around with those guys." That's a little interesting thing, because we have the conversation that was at Keesler Air Force Base. Little things like that,
right,
that stand out. And they are historically important, in my humble opinion.
Absolutely, I totally agree, and I'm looking forward to getting more of what I have here digitized as far as the recordings, because obviously the tape cassettes are disintegrating, and so it's very important to get.
Well, again, you also know what I've been working on, and if you were to happen across something like that, Philip, I've got something here that might interest you.
Yes, absolutely, that's important, and like you mentioned, it's just so important to share those things, because something that might not mean as much to me, it would mean the world to you. And so I think that's an important part, and that's a responsibility of having an archive, is your willingness to share that for other people.
I told you there was that letter there from the NASA's physicist. On the letterhead is his address and his name. So I copied that letter and I wrote to that address. And I said, I enclosed this letter that I found. I explained why I have no idea if it's still alive or not, but I thought I'll try. Now, the letter has not been replied to, but it's not been returned either. So make of that what you will. But had I not written to it, Erica, it would have bogged the living daylights out of me. I'd be thinking about it in bed on a night. I should have written to that fella. How do I know he's not alive? He might still be at that address. And there's only one way to find that out, isn't there? And that's to write to him. That's Absolutely. To contact him.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, it's there, and there's so many. We've gone on for a marathon show, I have to say, and I could keep talking and talking, and there's so many other things that I wanted to ask you about, but we have not. We'll have to do it again. Is definitely a plan, because I want to learn more about the UK scene, and just the different things that you've experienced, the people that you've talked to, and so please plan a, we'll plan a time when you can come back, and we can do that.
Well, what might also might be useful, whenever the Pascagoula documentary comes out in the UK, hopefully the producer might, have a few words to say. So you might be able to show a few clips from that. They'll have a trailer for it and things like that as well. So, because on that, I have a list here next to me, are all the witnesses that were interviewed for it. And some of them I've not even mentioned their names tonight. There's that many of them. Which of them make the final cut? Of course, I don't know. But I think some of them will interest you as well.
That would be wonderful. I appreciate that. That's exciting. And I'm thank you so much. Thanks for staying up late and for being so willing.
You do realize I missed the football match tonight.
Oh,
you do realize that.
Oh Lord.
I mean, it's shocking.
I am so sorry. Like
Erica, you cannot see how happy it made my wife to know that she didn't have to watch the football tonight.
Well, then I'm doing it for her. That's good. I'm so glad. I appreciate you taking time away, because I know this is a very serious time for people that enjoy football. So that is.
No, but it's been my pleasure, Erica. It's been lovely to speak to you, and
absolutely.
I hope your listeners have got something out of it this evening.
They great responses in the chat room. I really appreciate it, my friend. So take care of yourself. Have a happy new year. I know it's almost January, but I haven't spoken with you. So happy new year, and my best to you and your family. And I will look forward to talking to you soon, and best of luck with the book.
All
and
right.
You can find that on Amazon, by the way. So
well, it's on Amazon. It's also in English, French, and Spanish. So if English is not your first language, then certainly in the United States, Spanish might be your language. It's there in those 3 languages as well, and a Kindle, and even an audio book.
Wonderful. Thank you. Best of luck.
Bye-bye now.
Soon. Take care. Thank you. Thank you. That was a fun interview, and I went longer than I expected, but it was just great to talk to Philip. I appreciate him staying up late. I appreciate all of you staying up late, because I know, Jim, you guys are over there, and Simon, and it is past your bedtime, even though I know some of you are night owls very clearly. I want to thank Jack Brewer for being in chat again, and you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out our last 2 blogs that we have just posted in the past couple days. They are very important. We're getting good feedback from people that are outside the UFO community who are watching our work and are very interested in what we are coming up with. We will continue to do FOIA requests. Jack and I have a lot going on this year, and we will continue to make waves, push boundaries, and make sure that credible research is out there for one and all. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and you guys stay safe. Peter, thank you for sharing this. And if you guys can all just take a minute, like, subscribe. I always forget to do that, but like, subscribe, share, get the word out there. I appreciate it. And I will catch you guys next week. Take care.